They gave me one glyph and one chance, and the glyph came back reading a word that is not even supposed to be a grade. Null. Zero talent. The kind of result the examiners have to look up in the old books because nobody living has seen it before. The whole Blood Council hall went quiet in that specific way a room goes quiet when everyone is deciding whether to laugh or run. My half-brother Cassian decided first. He laughed loud enough that it echoed off the vaulted ceiling twice. Well, he said, loud enough for every allied house to hear it. At least the glyph is honest. Someone had to be. A ripple of polite, delighted laughter followed him down the row of seated nobles, like he had earned applause. Father did not laugh. That was almost worse. Lord Dorian Ashvale crossed the dais himself, in front of every allied house invited to watch his heir awaken, and peeled the crest from my coat with his own hands. He did it slowly. Not out of cruelty, I told myself later, but because ripping cloth that has been sewn into a family for 4 generations does not come apart in one clean pull. It takes work. A house does not carry passengers, he said, to the hall, and not to me, the way a man reads a verdict he had already written before the trial began. He never once looked at my face while he said it. I want to say I had something clever to say. I did not. I had rain, cold enough to sting, and a set of house guards who did not meet my eyes on the long walk to the gate. Here's the only joke I managed, and I made it to myself since nobody else was in a listening mood. Null is the one exam result they will never let me retake. Every other failure in my life came with a second attempt. This one came with a locked door, a stripped coat, and a number that means nothing, stamped over a name that used to mean a great deal to a great many people who were currently pretending not to watch me leave. The gate shut. Nobody watched me go, except Cassian, who watched the whole thing from the top step with the particular satisfaction of a man who has just stopped worrying about his only real competition. 11 weeks later, Meridian is not a city anymore. It is a shape a city used to have, with the roads still where roads should be and nothing else where anything else used to be. They call it the hollowing, and it did not knock first. It came up through the water mains, through the grain stores, through anyone who died with unfinished business, and it did not care what house anyone's crest used to belong to. I have spent 11 weeks learning that a false rank and a real death sentence feel exactly the same from the inside. Tonight, the difference is closing fast, in the shape of something that used to be a soldier. It is alone, which should be good news, and it is not, because alone means it did not need help to get this far, and it does not expect to need help finishing me. It moves like something that is never once lost. I am in a dead end, collapsed stairwell behind me, open square in front of me, and one very large, very patient former human between me and either direction I could conceivably run. No sword, no plan, no house left to disown me a second time, which is somehow the least useful thought I have ever managed to produce at the worst possible moment of my life so far. It closes the last of the distance almost gently, the way something confident does not need to hurry. And I catch myself doing the math on how many seconds of dignity I have left. Not many. Then the world changes color, just at the edges of my vision, the way it does right before you understand you are about to either die or be handed something you cannot afford. Hollow ledger, initialized. Bind the dying thing in your grip or let it finish what it started. One line, no menu, no tour, no time to ask what a ledger even is or who is billing me for it. I do not remember deciding. I remember my hand closing on cold, wrong flesh a half second before its teeth would have closed on my throat, and something in my chest answering that grip like it had been waiting its whole life to be asked. The thing under my hand goes rigid, then still, then wrong in a completely different way. The way a puppet goes wrong when somebody finally picks up the strings that used to be tangled and useless. Entry 1, rank SSS. I read it twice because the first time I was certain I had misread it, and the second time the number had not changed its mind either, sitting there calm as anything. The soldier that was hunting me a heartbeat ago turns, unhurried, and walks straight through the 3 hollow that had been closing on my back the whole time I was busy dying slowly instead of quickly. It does not fight them so much as in them, one after another, like you would clear plates off a table you were finished with. I laugh once, which is the wrong reaction, and I know it is the wrong reaction while I am already doing it. Something opens behind my ribs, warm and enormous, and I feel a number climb inside me that I have no name for yet. Core, level 1, sliding up to level 2 while I am still standing in the wreckage of a fight it just won for me. It keeps going. Level 2 to level 3, a slow, hot pressure behind my sternum that does not hurt exactly, but insists on being noticed, the way a held breath insists on eventually being let out. I check it twice, like you check a winning number twice, before you believe the till did not make a mistake in your favor. Level 3, still level 3. 11 weeks of my life have been subtraction. This is the first thing that has ever added. I do not get long to enjoy it. Something is crying 2 streets over, thin and furious under a slab of collapsed wall, and the voice is doing something no proper hollow voice should be able to do anymore. It is arguing. I follow it past a checkpoint that used to sell fruit and find a woman pinned to the waist under fallen concrete, one arm free, and 3 looters circling her with the unhurried interest of men pricing meat before a sale. She is mid-transformation. I can see it happening in real time, the gray creeping up from her collarbone, and she is still talking, still bargaining, still telling the men crouched over her that she has coin hidden if they only wait 1 more minute. Save your breath, one of the looters tells her, almost bored about it. Part sell whether you are still talking or not. His friend laughs the way Cassian laughed, and for one ugly second, the 2 sounds line up perfectly in my memory. He raises a length of pipe toward her skull, businesslike, the way you would finish off livestock that had already stopped being worth arguing with. My first hollow crosses the distance before I have finished deciding to send it after him. The looters do not stay to negotiate with something that just tore 3 of their kind apart on the way here. They run, and I let them go, because the woman under the slab is still breathing, and I have exactly 1 working thought left in me. I could feed her to the ledger, cheap and painless, 1 more anonymous entry, and walk away with anchor points intact and a stranger's death filed under a system that already does not care about names. I do not do that. I reach the slab, get a hand on her wrist while she is still lucid enough to be openly terrified of me specifically, and choose the expensive door instead of the free one sitting right there. The system does not warn me kindly about the price. It shows me the toll the second I commit to it. A gauge I only just learned existed, collapsing from nearly full to barely a sliver, all in the space of 1 held breath. Named bind costs what an ordinary bind costs, times more than I want to think about, and I feel every last coin of it leave me at once, like something reaching into my chest and taking a fistful on the way out through my ribs. For 1 very bad second, I have no idea whether I have enough left to walk the 2 streets back to nowhere in particular. I decide I will find out the hard way, because turning back on her now was never actually an option worth considering. She comes back from wherever the transformation almost took her all at once, gasping, and the first thing she does with her working hand is grab my wrist hard enough to leave a bruise by morning. Her eyes are clear, human clear, furious clear, and completely unconvinced that whatever just happened to her counts as being saved. Am I dead? She asks. Because if I am dead, I would like that explained to me properly, and soon. Not dead, I tell her. Filed differently. I am still working on better wording. She does not laugh, which is fair, since I would not laugh either if a stranger had just rewritten what species I count as without asking first. Then something snaps open between us, a channel with no door and no warning, and I am looking at my own face through her eyes for exactly 1 disorienting second before the view swings back around to her again. She goes rigid, 1 hand flying to her own temple, like she can physically push the intrusion back out through her skull. "Get out of my head," she says, low and furious, and I already know I am not the only one hearing every word she says next. I did not put myself there, I tell her, as evenly as I can manage, while also hearing my own voice come back to me faintly through whatever she has just become. Command link, apparently. Nobody handed me a manual for any of this. Then start writing one, she says. And there is something under the fury that might, in a better week, have been the beginning of a joke. Smart mercies. I decide not to push my luck by pointing that out to her yet. I spend the walk out explaining what little I actually understand, which is not much, in the same flat tone I would use to talk myself down from a bad decision, because it is currently the only tone I have left. Her name is Vesper Kane. She was Meridian Defense Corps before the mains went bad, and she has strong opinions about being turned into what she keeps calling my tin soldier. Opinions she is not remotely shy about sharing out loud. I do not have a good answer for her. I have a ledger reading 9 entries higher than it did an hour ago, because somewhere in the last stretch of ruin, I stopped counting carefully and started binding on pure instinct instead. A farmer entry, quiet and patient, kneels in what used to be a courtyard, hands already moving through rubble like it is looking for something worth planning before anyone tells it to start. A guard entry plants itself at the nearest choke point unasked. Ledger 2 climbs to 9 while Vesper watches, arms crossed, radio dead weight at her hip, deciding in real time whether horror or curiosity is going to win the argument happening behind her eyes. Core hits level 6 on the last of them. That is 9 of them now, she says, flat, like she is filing a complaint rather than a head count. You collect these like other people collect debt. I tell her that is, unfortunately, the single most accurate thing anyone has said to me all night. We need walls before we need anything clever, she says next, before I can suggest anything at all, and points not at the collapsed shop fronts I was already eyeing, but at the old freight depot 2 blocks down with its blast doors still standing intact. I want to argue on principle, mostly because it is her plan and not mine, and then I look properly at the depot's unbroken steel and decide my pride can survive losing this particular argument without permanent damage. Guard entries can hold a door that heavy without tiring, she adds, already walking toward it. Your shop fronts would last one bad night. I ask her since when she started giving tactical briefings to a man she met 20 minutes ago. Since you started needing one, she says. The guard entries drag the doors shut behind us with a groan of metal that has not moved since the hollowing, and for one held second, the whole depot goes silent enough that I can actually hear my own pulse deciding to slow down. It is not safety. I know better than to call it that, out loud or otherwise. But it is 4 solid walls and a roof that has not fallen in yet, which by tonight's standards, counts as the nicest place I have lived since the gate shut behind me. There's a strip of cracked loading yard behind the depot that still gets actual daylight, and by the second hour, Vesper has the farmer entry turning it into rows instead of rubble, patient gray hands never once slowing down or complaining. Planning corpses to grow food is, I decide, the single least dignified sentence I've ever thought about myself, and also possibly the most useful one, which tells you everything you need to know about the last 11 weeks. By the time the light fails, the first count comes back on the yield. Small, almost embarrassing next to what a real farm would call a harvest. But it is a number that did not exist yesterday morning, and it belongs to me. Vesper keeps the radio close after that, turning the dial with the kind of muscle memory that apparently survives even getting bound into something a house would strip its own coat off for admitting to know. Somewhere past midnight, it catches something that is not static. Patrol chatter, clipped and careful, a commons frequency she recognizes from before all of this. Sweeping grid squares that are creeping steadily closer to a depot the maps insist is empty. They are not close yet, she says, but they are looking, and people who are looking eventually find things. Especially things standing exactly where every map anyone still trusts insists nothing should be standing at all. I am still turning that over when the dial catches a second signal underneath the first, cleaner, colder, house issue by the Christmas alone, and Vesper's whole posture changes the instant she manages to place it. That is not a commons patrol, she says, quiet now in a way that frightens me far more than shouting ever could. That is a House Asheville scan pattern, and it is not sweeping the district at random. It is hunting one specific registration number. She reads it back to me, digit by digit, and it is mine. The same number they stripped off my coat in the rain 11 weeks ago is now the one thing out of an entire dead city that my own house has finally bothered to go looking for. Neither of us sleeps. There is not much point pretending otherwise, so I do not bother, and instead I test the one thing I actually understand less than I should, which is what Vesper and I are now wired into. She does not say a word out loud. I watch 3 of my own hollow shift formation at the far end of the yard anyway, sliding into a loose triangle around the water barrel without a single order passing my lips. That is unsettling, I tell her, and also extremely convenient. She does not look up from the radio. Get used to unsettling, she says. It is going to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting around here from now on. I push the test further because apparently I have decided that terrifying myself methodically counts as productive use of a bad night. Can you do that from the far wall? I ask. Without looking at them at all. She proves it by turning her back on the 3 entries entirely and walking them through a slow rotation anyway, eyes fixed on me the whole time, like she is daring me to find the edge of what Command Link actually lets her do. I do not find the edge. That is, on balance, more frightening than reassuring, and I decide not to say so out loud, because she already looks entirely too pleased with herself about the whole demonstration. I do not get long to enjoy the discovery. Something outside throws its full weight against the outer depot door. Once, then twice, and the second impact comes with a sound like a tooth working loose from a jaw. A feral pack, not bound, not mine, just hungry and organized enough to have found the one door in the block that still looked worth breaking open before dawn. The guard entry holding it does not flinch, but it does not hold perfectly either. I can feel the strain of it faintly through whatever thread now runs between me and my own entries. A dull ache that is not quite pain and not quite nothing, ticking up with every fresh impact against the steel. Door is not going to last if that keeps up, Vesper says, already moving, and I open my mouth to give an order I have not actually thought through yet. She does not wait around to hear how it ends. She has passed me before I finish the sentence. Radio dropped, one of my own guard entries falling in beside her like it had been waiting its whole short existence for exactly this instruction from exactly her and nobody else. I follow, mostly because standing still felt worse than moving, and arrive in time to watch her put the pack leader down herself, one clean motion with a length of rebar that should not have been enough and somehow was. She does not check with me first. She does not look back to see if I approve of the call. She reads the fight, picks the leader out of the pack the way you pick the one thread that unravels a whole knot, and ends it there. The rest of the pack breaks the second their leader hits the ground, scattering back into the dark, like animals do when the thing holding them together suddenly is not there to hold anything together anymore. I make it to the door in time to see her lower the rebar, breathing hard, already turning to check the garden bed behind us instead of checking on me first. "Garden's fine," she says, before I can even ask her. 2 days of food left. Do the math yourself. 2 days. I do the math anyway, because apparently I need to hear it in my own voice before it feels real enough to plan around. 2 days is not a number you build anything on. It is a number you survive underneath, quietly, and hope it grows. She catches me looking at her a beat too long and reads it wrong, or maybe reads it exactly right, which is worse. "Say it," she says. "Whatever it is you are working up to asking me, I would rather hear it plainly than watch you circle it politely." I am not sure what I am, I tell her honestly, since apparently that is the game we are playing tonight. Bound, human, something the house would probably classify and put a fee on if they ever found out it existed. She is quiet for a second, which from her is its own kind of answer. "I am the one who decides that," she says finally. "Not your ledger, not your house, me. You get to keep me useful. You do not get to define me, ever, on any terms." "Fair," I tell her, and mean it, and something in her shoulders drops half an inch, which for a woman who just killed a pack leader with her bare hands, is roughly the equivalent of anyone else bursting into tears in relief. "One more thing," she adds, before I can feel too proud of myself for handling that conversation like an adult. "What do I call you?" Lord Ashvale feels like a joke neither of us wants to keep telling twice a day. "Kayla's fine," I tell her. "Everyone who used the full version is either dead, hunting me, or currently re-evaluating a lifetime of decisions somewhere warmer than this depot." She almost smiles at that. Almost. It counts. "Good," she says. "Glad we settled that before the next thing tries to eat us. Now that we have that out of the way, there is a pharmacy 2 blocks north that has not been fully stripped yet, if we are quick about it. I can see it through the link if you point one of the new entries that direction," she adds. "Try not to get us both killed finding out whether it is worth the walk." I tell her I will do my absolute best, which does not seem to reassure her at all. I send a scout entry ahead and watch through borrowed eyes as it moves down a street I have never walked, past a bus that has not gone anywhere since the mains went bad, toward a pharmacy sign hanging on by exactly 1 bolt. Halfway there the link flickers, just once. A cold, static jolt that feels like losing a limb for half a second before it snaps back into place. Vesper swears under her breath. "Anchor's still thin," she says. "Do not push 3 entries at once again tonight." "Noted," I tell her, and mean it more than I would like to admit out loud, because for that half second, I could not tell if I had just lost a ledger entry or blinked at the wrong moment. There are people already inside the pharmacy, 4 of them, going through shelves with the particular carelessness of men who have done this exact thing a dozen times this month and stopped being careful around the 5th or 6th pass. I do not send the scout in swinging. I let it stand in the doorway, quiet, patient, wrong in a way that does not need to announce itself, and watch through its eyes as all 4 of them notice it at once and go very still. Nobody draws a weapon. Nobody needs to. They back out through the rear of the shop in a ragged line, muttering about not being paid enough to argue with something that size over a shelf of expired painkillers and cough syrup. One of them looks back on his way out, and his eyes catch on the strip of cloth still stitched to my collar, the half-scraped remnant of a crest I never managed to fully cut away, no matter how many times I tried with a blade. His whole face changes. "Ashvale," he says, mostly to himself, and takes a full step backward like the name alone might reach out and grab him by the throat from 2 blocks away through a hollow he has never personally met. That is the first time in 11 weeks the name has done anything for me except get me thrown out into the rain in front of witnesses. I do not know yet whether to find that funny or useful. Possibly both, I decide, filing it away for later. "Small mercies," I mutter, mostly to myself, since apparently I am collecting those tonight. Vesper glances at me sideways through the link, unimpressed. "Do not get sentimental about a coat," she says. "It has not done anything for you yet except almost get you killed twice." The pack we scattered earlier has 1 straggler still lurking near the pharmacy's back lot, half feral and slow enough that binding it barely costs me anything at all compared to the last 2 I paid full, painful price for tonight. Entry 13. Ledger climbs from 9 to 13 in the space it takes Vesper to glance over and say, without being asked, "Scout. Put it on scout duty." We need eyes further out than the yard can currently see on its own. I do not argue. I am starting to understand that arguing with her about entry assignments is a losing habit I should retire early, before it becomes the specific thing that gets one of us killed on principle alone one night. We bring back a second farmer entry from the cleared block, and by the time it joins the first in the loading yard, the food count ticks up in a way I can feel settle in my chest, not just read off a passing number. 2 days becomes 5. 5 is not safe. 5 is not even close to safe, not by any measure that matters. But 5 is enough room to breathe without doing the subtraction every single hour, and after tonight, I will take it gladly. Vesper does the math out loud anyway, because apparently, that is a habit neither of us is willing to break yet, even now that the worst of tonight is technically behind us for the moment. 5 days, 2 farmers, 1 working garden bed. Not a kingdom, she adds, barely a foothold. But it is ours, and nobody handed it to us, and if the house wants it back, they can come explain that to the door themselves. I do not tell her how much I like the sound of that sentence. She logs the roster out loud while she still remembers the exact order, like soldiers count gear before they trust it to be there in the morning. 13 entries, 2 farmers, 4 guards, 1 scout, and 1 alpha that still makes her flinch slightly whenever it walks past. That last one has a name now, apparently, whether I gave it one or not. She has started calling it Ash, dry as anything, and refuses to explain the joke to me even when I ask directly. I decide I do not actually want to know. 2 streets away, in a room that still has most of its roof, the marauder who recognized my crest is not thinking about painkillers anymore. He is thinking about the going rate for a rumor this specific and this fresh. He finds the man who buys rumors like this for a living within the hour. A Concord contact who works the district under a courier's badge and asks very few questions about where information comes from before he pays for it. A living Asheville, the marauder tells him, running hollow like a private army out of the old freight blocks. The Concord man does not smile exactly, but he takes out a notebook that has clearly seen worse news paid for at a worse price before. He writes down the block, the crest, the word hollow underlined twice, and folds the page away into a coat that has carried worse secrets than this one, before tonight finishes being counted and filed somewhere far above either of them. The patrol finds us before the sun is properly up. 6 of them, weapons raised, spreading into a loose arc across the depot yard, like people who have rehearsed exactly this approach against exactly this kind of target before. Their leader is a woman my own age or close to it. Dark-eyed, steady-handed, with the specific calm of someone who has already decided how this is going to go, and is only waiting for a reason to start. We had reports of hollow activity out of this block, she says. Not to me exactly, more to the air between us, rifle never wavering an inch off my chest. If this is a nest, we burn it before it spreads into the commons. Her people are lean in the way survivors get lean, not starved exactly, but rationed down to muscle and habit. Every one of them watching the depot's dark doorway, like they expect something to come pouring out of it at any second now. I count 6 weapons, 6 sets of eyes that have clearly done this exact standoff before and lost people doing it. And I understand, in the space of that one look, that nothing I say in the next few seconds is going to sound like the truth to any of them. I do not reach for anything. Reaching for anything currently feels like the fastest possible way to end a conversation I would very much like to survive. My name is Kale, I tell her. This is not a nest, it is barely a foothold. She does not lower the weapon. Celine Cross, she says, like the name itself is a warning label. Ward Point comments. You have about 10 seconds to explain why I should not treat every one of your hollow as a threat to my people right now. I do not get the 10 seconds. Something feral crashes out of the ruined block behind her patrol, with no interest whatsoever in the standoff it is about to interrupt. Teeth first, aimed at the youngest patroller in the line. He freezes. The way you freeze when the thing you trained for finally arrives faster than the training did. I do not think. I send the order the way I sent the last one, through instinct rather than any plan I could name. One of my guard entries crosses the yard and puts itself bodily between the feral and the boy, taking the impact meant for his throat across its own shoulder instead, and does not so much as stagger from the weight of it. The whole patrol swings their weapons toward my entry instead, and for one terrible second I do not know if I am about to watch them shoot the thing that just saved one of their own out of pure reflex and fear. Hold, Celine barks, and they hold. And the boy stared up at the hollow standing over him with an expression that has clearly never once considered the word protected as something that creature could mean toward him. Celine lowers her rifle exactly 2 inches, no more, watching the guard entry step back into formation without being told twice. That does not make you trustworthy, she says. It makes you unpredictable. I am not sure that is better. I do not argue with her. I have learned, mostly from Vesper, that arguing with a competent woman holding a weapon rarely improves my odds of the conversation ending well for me personally. Prove it, Celine says instead, flat, final. Not with a demonstration, with something my people can actually use. Otherwise this whole yard burns by nightfall, and I stop losing sleep over whether that was fair to you. I think about what we actually have. Not much. A depot, a garden bed, 13 entries, and one very specific piece of information I picked up scouting the pharmacy block 2 nights ago that I have not used yet. Vesper's voice arrives in my head before I have finished the thought, low and pointed, for my ears only. Do not promise her anything you cannot actually deliver, Kale. She is not going to forgive a second lie the way the Commons apparently forgives a first one. I am aware, I tell her silently, and mean it, because I have already watched exactly how fast a house can turn a broken promise into a public spectacle, and I have no intention of running that particular experiment twice in one lifetime. There's medicine 2 blocks past the infected quarter, I tell her. A pharmacy your people have not reached, because nobody sane walks through that block twice. I will get it to your infirmary. Free, tonight. No condition attached to it at all. She studies me for a long moment, clearly deciding whether free is a word she still believes anyone means. Free is the one price a desperate person always wants to believe, and I am gambling that she is desperate enough tonight to test it anyway. Fine, she says finally. Try. If it works, we talk again. If it does not, do not come near this sector a second time. I do not tell her how much that sounded like the exact same deal my own father once offered me, worded slightly kinder. I send the newest courier entry, the one bound off the pharmacy straggler 2 nights back, loaded with everything the shelves had left worth carrying, straight through the quarter everyone in Meridian has learned to walk around. The infected block is not empty. Something large moves parallel to the entry for 4 full blocks, matching its pace exactly, and I watch through the link with my heart doing something unpleasant behind my ribs the entire way. It never closes the distance. Whether that is luck, or the courier's careful pace, or something about the crate it carries that the thing does not want, I honestly do not know, and I decide not to examine the gift too closely. It reaches the far checkpoint with the crate intact and not a single vial cracked, and hands it, or whatever passes for handing when your hands stopped being entirely human weeks ago, directly to the first Commons runner who dares approach it. The medicine reaches the infirmary inside the hour, and I learn only after the fact exactly who it was for. Milo, Celine's younger brother, 11 years old, fever climbing for 2 days on supplies that ran out yesterday afternoon. I am not there for it. Vesper watches through the link and tells me after, because apparently that is how I am going to receive most of the good news in my life from now on, secondhand, through a woman who edits for content. He drank the whole dose without arguing, she says. First time in 2 days he stopped shaking long enough to actually sleep. Celine sat with him the entire time and did not say one single word to anyone else in the room. She finds me at the depot gate the next morning before the crowd arrives, alone. No rifle this time, which I have already learned to read as its own kind of statement from a woman who does not put a weapon down casually. Thank you does not cover it, she says, and looks like the words cost her something to say out loud to a man wearing the crest of a house her people have spent a decade avoiding. I am not going to say it twice, so take it while it lasts. I tell her she does not owe me a second one. She looks at me like she is recalculating something behind her eyes, then nods once, sharp, and walks off before either of us can turn the moment into something neither of us actually wants yet. Word moves through the Commons faster than any courier ever could. By the following morning, there are people standing at the edge of the depot yard who spend every week since the hollowing calling everything out of this block cursed. They watch a guard entry stack crates without dropping one. They watch a farmer entry tend the garden rows with a patience no living laborer this hungry could manage to fake for very long. Nobody throws anything. Nobody spits. Nobody even speaks, at first. An old woman near the front mutters something to the man beside her, too quiet for me to catch, and he nods slowly, arms uncrossing for the first time since he arrived expecting to hate whatever he found here. A boy no older than 10 pushes to the front of the crowd and asks, loud enough for half the yard to hear, whether the gray hands hurt when they work. Nobody answers him right away. Vesper crouches down to his height and tells him, honestly, that she does not think so anymore. He considers that with the total seriousness only a child can manage, then announces that he wants to watch the garden ones dig, and his mother does not pull him back the way she clearly would have done yesterday morning. Celine arrives at midday with 4 of her own people flanking her, and this time, nobody raises a weapon before she has finished walking the full length of the yard, taking in the garden, the crates, the entries standing quiet at their posts. Temporary trade contract, she announces, loud enough for her own people to hear it clearly. No room left for anyone to pretend later that she said something softer. Medicine, food, salvage, in exchange for safe passage and priority on deliveries. Provisional. Editor's Weekly. One of her own patrollers, the boy who got shielded in the yard 2 nights ago, looks at her like she has just done something braver than anything he watched a hollow do for him personally. She does not look back at him. She looks at me. Somewhere in the crowd behind her, a woman I do not recognize says, not quietly at all, that she would rather trade with a cursed depot that saved a child than a Concord licensing office that has never once answered a single request for medicine in all the weeks since the hollowing. Nobody argues with her. That, more than the contract itself, is the part I decide to remember, because a room agreeing on something out loud is worth more than any single voice, however loud it happens to be tonight. Do not make me regret this in front of my own people, she says, and there is nothing soft in it at all, which is somehow the most reassuring thing anyone has said to me since the gate shut behind me. I agree, before she can change her mind about any part of it. Vesper, watching the whole exchange from the depot doorway, notes for the record that the counter now reads, 1 delivery. On time, 100%, which she informs me is technically a perfect record. Enjoy it while it lasts, she adds. Perfect records exist specifically to get ruined the moment you start being proud of them. I decide not to argue with a woman who has been right about literally everything else so far tonight. 3 checkpoints away, at a Concord customs post that still runs on a generator older than either of us, an inspector reviewing overnight courier logs stops on one entry that does not match any registered carrier in the district's licensing files. Unregistered cadaver class logistics, she writes, in the neat, unhurried hand of someone who has flagged worse things before breakfast and fully expects to flag several more before the shift ends. Origin block, Freight Depot, Sector 9. She circles it twice. She does not know yet that the same block also produced a rumor sold 2 nights earlier to a courier badge contact 3 checkpoints over. Nobody has connected the 2 entries in any ledger but hers, not yet, and she has no reason tonight to look for the pattern. She simply files the report where reports like this always go, into a stack that grows a little taller every week, and moves on to the next line item without giving the freight depot in Sector 9 a second thought before her shift ends. The first caravan arrives 3 mornings later, 2 carts and 4 commons haulers, all of them visibly deciding whether walking into a depot full of hollow counts as the worst decision they have made all month. Celine rides with them personally, which I understand now is not trust so much as insurance. If something goes wrong here, she wants to be standing in the middle of it, not reading about it secondhand from a runner. Nothing goes wrong. The carts unload, my entries stack crates without dropping one, and the haulers leave 2 hours later with a stack of preserved rations and a story none of them expected to be telling anyone back home tonight. One of the haulers, older than the rest, lingers at the gate a moment longer than he needs to, watching a guard entry hold a cart steady while a second one lifts crates down without being asked twice. He does not say anything. He just watches, carefully, like a man updating an old opinion by hand. Celine notices him noticing. Do not mistake watching for trusting, she tells me quietly, once the carts have rolled clear of the yard. My people are curious. Curious keeps them alive long enough to eventually decide whether they are also willing to be grateful. Vesper watches them go and then looks at the depot, the garden, the wall we have not properly built yet, and says it needs a name. Not a joke name. Something people can actually point at on a map and mean. I do not have a good one ready, so I steal the obvious. The Hollow Reach, I tell her, and she repeats it once, testing the shape of it in her mouth, then nods like it has passed some private inspection I was not aware of. She draws it by hand that night on the back of an old requisition form, the depot, the garden yard, the pharmacy block, 3 sections wide, and writes the name across the top in block letters like she is daring anyone to argue with it. It is not much of a territory, 3 blocks, most of them still half rubble. But it is the first thing since the gate shut behind me that has a name I chose, instead of one stamped on me by somebody else's judgment. The 15th bind comes off a wandering feral 2 nights later, and the cost hits differently than the last 14 did, a hard yank at the anchor gauge that leaves it lower than a bind that size should have cost me. I stare at the number for a long moment, checking it the way I checked core level 3 back on the first night, half convinced I miscounted. I did not miscount. 15 costs more than 14 should have, by a margin that should not exist yet. 14 entries cost roughly what I expected. 15 costs enough more that I sit down on an overturned crate and do the comparison twice, on the theory that a mistake this specific has to be either an error in my head or a rule nobody wrote down for me. Vesper does not have an answer for it either, and neither do I, so we both file it under a problem for a version of us with more time to think about problems that are not actively trying to kill us this week. It is not going anywhere, neither are we. What I do have an answer for is the roster itself. Two of the early fighter entries, bound in that first desperate hour before I understood what I was doing, have been dead weight for a week, more expense than use. I retire them both, feeding the reclaimed anchor capacity straight into a second farmer instead, and watch the ledger do the actual arithmetic in front of me. 2 gone, 1 gained, and the gain is worth more than the 2 ever were combined. It does not feel like an upgrade. It feels like choosing which of 2 debts to keep paying, which I suppose, when I think about it honestly, is the exact same decision my father makes every time he looks at his own house ledger. Vesper watches the 2 retired entries go still for the last time and does not offer any comfort about it, which I have come to appreciate more than comfort would actually help. They were never going to hold a line, she says. This is not cruelty, this is arithmetic. I tell her that is somehow a worse thing to hear out loud than if she had just called it cruelty and let me sit with that instead. She shrugs, entirely unmoved. Get used to it, she says. Arithmetic is going to be doing most of our deciding for us from here on. The greenhouse goes up inside a collapsed section of the old shopping mall 2 blocks over, glass panels salvaged and reset by guard entries who apparently do not care that the work is slow and tedious and entirely beneath what they were built to survive. It takes 4 days of steady, unglamorous labor before the first real number comes back. Food stock climbs from 5 days to 12, and this time Vesper does not undercut it with a joke. She just looks at the number for a second and nods once. 12 days is not safety either. I have stopped expecting any number to mean safety. But 12 days is a number I can plan a week around instead of an afternoon. And after weeks of planning nothing further than the next meal, that alone feels enormous. Celine sends 3 hired hands to help run the greenhouse rotation, commons workers who need the extra rations more than they trust the arrangement. And I watch the first morning shift with genuine unease about how this is going to go. It does not go smoothly. One of the workers, a thin man named Corin, will not stand within 10 feet of the farmer entries for the first 2 hours, flinching every time one straightens up from the rows without warning him first. By mid-afternoon, he is handing tools directly to gray hands without looking away first. Not because the fear is gone, I think, but because hunger and 12 straight days of safe food outlast most fears eventually, given enough time to work on a person. A second worker, a heavy-set woman everyone calls Dessa, treats the whole rotation like a joke she has not finished telling yet, narrating each farmer entry's movements out loud to nobody in particular. That one's a better gardener than my late husband ever was, she announces, and does not lower her voice at all. Corin laughs at that, short and surprised, like the sound caught him off guard as much as it caught me. It is the first laugh I have heard inside the reach that was not mine, dry and defensive, or Vesper's, sharp and mostly aimed at me. Vesper is the one who catches the drone. I am checking the greenhouse numbers when she goes very still at the depot's north wall. Eyes fixed on a point in the sky I cannot see anything in at all. Concord issue, she says, not moving her head. Slow circuit, low altitude, recon configuration, not a weapon platform. It has made that same pass twice now. They are not guessing about us anymore. They are confirming something they already suspect. I ask her how she can tell all of that from one distant speck of moving metal, and she gives me a look that reminds me, not for the first time, that she spent years doing this exact job before any of this happened to either of us. Rumor reaches us the same evening, carried in by one of Celine's runners, who heard it 3 separate times on the walk over and clearly did not enjoy repeating it a 4th. House Ashvale has posted a bounty on the disgraced Null Son, on me. I laugh, once, badly, the same wrong laugh from the first night, because apparently that is just what I do now when something lands too heavy to process any other way. They did not want me at the ceremony. They want me now that I am worth something. Vesper does not laugh with me. She watches me not laugh for a moment, then says, quietly, that a house does not spend coin hunting something it considers worthless, and that I should sit with that fact for exactly as long as it takes to be useful and no longer. I sit with it for about 4 minutes, which I decide is close enough to her instructions, and then I go back to work, because the alternative is standing still long enough for all those weeks of rain and a torn crest to catch up with me all at once. Somewhere in that 4 minutes, I catch myself doing the arithmetic on it anyway, the way I do arithmetic on everything now. A house does not post coin on a nobody. They post coin on a liability, and I have apparently just been promoted from one category into the other without anyone consulting me first. Congratulations to me, I say out loud, to no one, and Vesper's voice arrives dry and immediate through the link. That is the worst attempt at a joke I have heard you make yet, and I have heard you try several. I tell her I am still working on the delivery. She tells me not to bother. We double the guard rotation that night, without discussing it out loud. Entries pulled off farm and scout duty and set along the wall in pairs. and Vesper redraws the map with 2 new blocks penciled in at the northern edge before dawn. 3 blocks becomes 5. It costs us guard hours we do not really have to spare, and a scout entry reassigned from the pharmacy run to a watch post instead, and nobody pretends out loud that the growth came free this time. 2 full districts away, in a study that still has working lamps, and a father who has not once asked where his other son went after the rain, Cassian Ashvale reads the same surveillance report our house scouts filed that morning. He reads the line about a private hollow force operating out of Sector 9 twice, then a third time, lingering on the phrase disgraced null son, with an expression that is not quite anger and not quite delight, but sits somewhere uncomfortably between the two. Father, he says, setting the report down with more care than it deserves, this cannot be allowed to stand. A null carrying house colors into common territory. It is an insult to everyone who actually earned their rank at that ceremony, myself included. He does not say the second part out loud, though it sits under every word he has chosen so far. That the boy, who once trailed behind him at every house function, who never once outscored him at anything that mattered, has somehow found a way to matter again without permission, and Cassian cannot stand it. Dorian does not look up from his own correspondence right away, which Cassian has learned over 24 years to read as neither agreement nor refusal, only patience running thin around the edges of a man who dislikes being interrupted twice in one evening. Let me handle it personally, Cassian presses. Quietly. No house banners, no formal writ, nothing the council needs to approve or remember later. I will bring back proof it was dealt with, and nobody outside this room needs to know it was ever a problem at all. Dorian is quiet long enough that Cassian almost repeats himself, and then their father sets down his pen, finally, and studies his remaining son with the same flat, assessing look he once gave a glyph that read nothing but null, and mints it. Quietly, Dorian says at last, and it is not quite permission and not quite refusal either, which Cassian, smiling now in a way that does not reach anywhere near his eyes, decides to treat as exactly the answer he came here hoping to hear tonight. A traitor named Osric reaches our gate at a dead run, out of breath, hands shaking too hard to hold the cup Vesper offers him without spilling half of it down his own coat before he manages a swallow. There is another tamer, he says, 2 sectors east, not like you. He does not ask his hollow to fight. He burns them until they obey, and when they do not obey fast enough, he burns them anyway, in front of anyone still watching. He lost a nephew there yesterday, close enough to the demonstration to catch the edge of it, and he has clearly not slept since, judging by the raw look around his eyes and the way his hands will not fully stop shaking even now. He calls the man Draven, spits the name more than says it, and tells us the Marauder band's 2 sectors east have started paying him in food just to keep his camp pointed away from their own supply routes. Fear, Osric says, apparently buys more loyalty out here than coin ever did. Vesper asks him, gently for her, whether he came here for help or a warning. Both, he admits. Mostly warning. I do not think anyone can stop a man who burns his own tools for an audience, but somebody ought to at least know his name before he reaches this far west. Vesper sends a scout ahead before I have finished asking her to, and what it finds through the link 2 hours later turns my stomach in a way weeks of hollowing somehow never quite managed to do before this. It takes the better part of an hour to cross the ruined blocks between us and his camp. Chains. Not binds, chains. Iron through flesh that should not still be able to feel iron. A whole camp of hollow held in place by pain instead of whatever it is my ledger actually does when it takes hold of something dying. They do not move like mine move. Mine move like they are choosing to. His shuffle and flinch and strain against the links every time he raises his voice. The way something moves when obedience is the only alternative to worse. He is younger than I expected, maybe my own age, lean and sharp-featured, and the moment my scout entry gets close enough for his own hollow to register the signature, he goes very still, then smiles like he has been waiting for this exact visit. Another tamer, he says, to the empty street more than to anyone in particular, since he cannot see me directly yet. Soft hands, judging by how careful your creature is being with my fence line. I did not think the gentle method had made it this far east yet. I do not answer him, mostly because I have not decided yet whether answering makes anything better. He does not wait for an answer anyway. He turns to the nearest chained hollow and backs it into a dry courtyard, chain drawn taut. Pain is honest, he says, to the street, to me, to anyone listening close enough to hear him over the rattle of chain. A bind takes days to earn trust. A chain takes an afternoon to earn obedience. I do not have days to spare on manners, and out here, soon enough, neither will you. Let me show you what soft actually costs, he says, and drives something into the creature's chest that is not a bind at all, more like a demand shouted directly into whatever is left of it. forcing more out of it than it was ever built to give. The hollow convulses, light tearing loose from somewhere under its skin. In a burst, nobody standing nearby should have been close enough to survive. And for one terrible second, the whole courtyard goes white, then silent, then full of screaming. A trader's stall at the courtyard's edge simply stops existing, and the boy who ran it, 16 at most, close enough to have been laughing at something only a minute before, does not get up again once the light clears from the wreckage. I know that boy. Finn. He has been running scrap and pharmacy tips to the Reach for 2 weeks now, trading gossip and salvage for a share of whatever the garden produces. Sharp-tongued and always underfoot, and never once careful enough for how dangerous this city actually is. He used to argue with Vesper about prices with a confidence that had nothing to do with actual leverage, and she used to let him win occasionally. And I am standing 2 streets away realizing I will never get to ask either of them why. Draven does not even look at what he has done. He is already turning back toward my scout, mildly annoyed at the interruption, the way a man is annoyed when a demonstration runs slightly over its intended length for an audience. Something in my chest goes very quiet and very cold. The exact opposite of the warmth Core Level 3 gave me on the first night, and I understand, with total clarity, that I am not scouting this camp anymore. I am ending it. I move the guard entry into the mouth of the courtyard first, planting it like a wall between Draven's remaining chained hollow and the street beyond, while a fighter entry circles wide along the far fence line where his attention is not. Vesper calls the positioning through the link a half second before I would have thought of it myself. Sharp and clipped, all business now. The grief push somewhere she can retrieve it later when we are both allowed to feel it properly. Draven throws 2 of his chained hollow at the guard at once, screaming an order that sounds more like a threat than an instruction, and the line holds, buckling but holding, exactly the way it is built to hold under sustained pressure. I feel the strain of it through the link, a grinding ache along one shoulder that is not my shoulder. And I understand for the first time what it costs the guard to keep standing there instead of stepping aside and letting the weight simply pass it by. It does not step aside. It was never going to. I did not build it to survive by moving out of the way, and for one long, ugly minute, I am not sure that choice was fair to make on its behalf, chained or not, mine or not. The fighter comes in from the flank while his attention is fixed on the guard, and for one clean moment, the fight looks almost even, his numbers against mine, his cruelty against whatever I have instead of cruelty, and then his own weapon turns on him. The overloaded entry, the one he demonstrated on, the one still smoking from whatever he forced into it, breaks its chain entirely and turns, not toward my guard, not toward my fighter, but directly toward the man who has been burning it alive by inches for weeks. Draven's eyes go wide in a way that has nothing to do with tactics and everything to do with a very specific, very personal kind of terror. He barely gets clear of it, stumbling backward over his own chains, and does not stop running once he is upright. For one full second, he looks at the thing he built, the thing he burned obedience into by inches, with something almost like betrayal, as if pain was supposed to be a contract that only ever ran in one direction, from him outward, never back. It was never going to hold that shape forever. I understand that now with a clarity I would rather not have earned tonight. Something forced to obey only through pain does not learn loyalty. It only learns exactly how much pain it can survive before it stops asking who is holding the chain. He is gone before my entries can close the distance, vaulting a collapsed fence with the kind of desperate speed that suggests this is not the first time his own methods have almost killed him, and will very likely not be the last either. The marauders who had been loosely allied with his camp do not chase after him. They stand very still instead, watching the smoking wreckage of his own creation, and one of them says quietly to nobody that maybe soft was never actually the weak method after all. Word of it moves faster than I do. By the time I make it back to the Reach, half a dozen people I have never met are already calling me something other than the disgraced Null's son, a name none of them use anymore without somebody correcting them out loud. The warden, someone in the crowd near the gate, calls me, testing the shape of it the way Vesper tested the Reach's name a few nights back, and I decide I do not hate it nearly as much as I probably should for a name born out of a boy's death. A title is cheaper than respect, Vesper tells me later, flat, not unkind. But you will take it anyway, because it is the only currency this city currently deals in, and pretending otherwise will not bring Finn back, or buy the next caravan any faster. She is right, and I hate that she is right, and I take the name anyway, the way you take anything useful that arrives already paid for in a currency you did not want to spend. The warden. I decide I will let it sit for now and see what it costs me later. I claim 2 of Draven's half-broken entries from the wreckage of his camp before we leave, chains cut, damage extensive, and the ledger logs them as mine with a cost far lower than any healthy bind would have run me tonight. They are not ready for anything. The The system is blunt about it. A slow recovery timer opening under each entry's name. No combat, no labor, nothing but time and whatever passes for rest until the damage the chains did finishes working itself out. It is not free salvage. I understood that the moment I saw the recovery clock start counting down, and some small, tired part of me is almost relieved that something in this whole miserable business still has to actually cost what it costs. Vepper crouches beside the more damaged of the two, studying the chain scars still visible along what used to be its collarbone, and says nothing for a long moment. They were somebody, she says finally. Before all of this, before him. I do not have anything to add to that, so I do not try. Vesper spends the walk home going through what little Draven left behind in his camp, ledgers and coin pouches mostly, and stops on one entry long enough that I know before she says anything that it is not going to be good news. He was being paid, she says finally. Regular coin, off a Concord account, routed through a courier badge. Somebody wanted him operating out here, loud and violent, and it was not charity. I ask her what that buys Concord. She does not have an answer yet. Neither do I. A violent, well-funded tamer 2 sectors east makes for excellent noise, she adds, turning the ledger page over in her hands like the answer might be written on the back of it too. Noise gives an office somewhere a reason to point at cadaver logistics and call the whole district a problem worth solving. I ask her if that means Draven was ever a threat to us specifically, or just useful chaos somebody else set loose in the right direction. She folds the ledger shut. Does it matter which, she says, if the result looks the same from where we are standing tonight? We reach the Reach's gate expecting the evening's second caravan, the one that should have arrived an hour before we did, loaded with grain and clean water for a garden that is barely keeping pace with how many mouths the Reach now feeds every night. It is not there. Celine's runner arrives instead, alone, out of breath, with no cart and no good explanation, only that the caravan left on schedule and simply has not shown up anywhere along its usual route since. Vesper looks at the empty gate, then at me, and does not say anything clever about it this time. The Reach has grown faster than its supply line can currently support, and tonight, for the first time since the depot doors first sealed shut, that gap is no longer theoretical. 12 days of food sounded generous 3 nights ago. Standing at an empty gate with a runner who has no cart and no explanation, it suddenly sounds like exactly the kind of number that stops meaning anything the moment the world decides to test it. The missing caravan turns up eventually, 3 streets off its usual route, both haulers unhurt but badly shaken. Wheel axle snapped on debris nobody had mapped yet. Nothing sinister, just the ordinary cruelty of a city that does not maintain its own roads anymore. It still costs us a full day we did not have to spare, and it makes one thing clear enough that I stop pretending otherwise. The Reach has grown past the point where I can send a caravan out and trust it will simply arrive without me riding along personally. So I go myself this time, 4 guard entries and a loaded cart toward the one working Concord checkpoint still processing bulk goods anywhere near our route, because the garden cannot outpace demand forever on hope alone. Vesper argues against it for exactly as long as it takes her to realize I am not actually asking permission. If something happens to you out there, she says, I am not sure this whole thing survives it long enough to matter. I tell her that is precisely why I am the one going, and not her. She does not like that answer. She comes along anyway, through the link, if not in the flesh, watching the road through 3 separate scout entries strung out ahead of the cart the entire way, silent and sharp behind my own eyes. The inspector at the checkpoint does not look up when we arrive, which I have already learned is not rudeness so much as method. She finishes the manifest in front of her first, in a hand too neat for how tired her eyes look, before she finally raises them to us. Cargo declaration, she says. Hand out, and I hand it over, and she reads it the way Celine once looked at my crest. Thorough, unhurried, giving nothing away about which direction her verdict is about to fall. Her badge reads Iris Calder, Concord Field Inspection, and everything about her, the crisp uniform, the exact posture, the total absence of small talk, says she has built a career on reading exactly this kind of paperwork correctly the first time. She counts the crates against the declaration twice, out loud, under her breath, the way a person counts something they have learned the hard way not to trust on a single pass. Her quota board behind her is covered in chalk marks, half of them crossed out, none of them forgiving. She gets 3 lines into the manifest before her expression changes. Small, controlled, but real. Representation prefix Asheville, she reads aloud, mostly to herself, then looks up at me properly for the first time since we arrived at her post. I do not lie to her, mostly because I have already learned that lying to competent people rarely buys more than a few extra minutes of a problem getting worse before it finds you again anyway, usually at a worse time. She does not react the way the marauder did outside the pharmacy. No fear. something closer to calculation. A woman weighing a very specific professional obligation against whatever her own eyes are currently telling her not to trust yet. This requires a formal report, she says, carefully, and I can hear the sentence costing her something even as she says it plainly. Unlicensed cadaver-class assets operating under a disowned house registration is not a small notation on a checkpoint log. I ask her what happens next if she files it. She does not answer right away, and I understand, watching her not answer, that she genuinely has not decided yet, which is somehow more unsettling than a fast, certain no would have been. I could ask you to reconsider, I say, mostly to see how she reacts to the offer of a bribe she has not technically been offered yet. She looks at me the way Celine looked at me the morning she nearly burned the depot down on principle. Do not, she says. That would answer the question for me, and not in your favor. Fair, I tell her, and mean it, the same word I gave Vesper on the first night, apparently becoming a habit whenever a competent woman corrects me in under 5 seconds flat. Neither of us gets the chance to finish that particular standoff. Something large hits the checkpoint's outer fence from the tree line behind us, fast, low, and entirely uninterested in whichever of us was about to speak next. A feral pack, 6 strong, the kind that has learned checkpoints means stalled carts and distracted guards, breaks through the fence line in a single, ugly rush, aimed straight at Iris's own detail before her people can properly form up. Her guards scatter more than they fight. 2 down before I have finished processing that the attack is real and not some elaborate test of my paperwork. Iris herself goes for a sidearm with steady hands, but steady hands do not stop 6 ferals at once. This stretch of road has a reputation, I will learn later. 3 incidents in 2 months, all logged, all unresolved, all filed under the same tired heading Iris keeps in a drawer, marked pending review, which means everyone at this post already knew tonight was a matter of when, not if. I do not think about the order. I have stopped thinking about most of these orders since the first night, and my entries are already moving before I have consciously decided to spend anything at all on a woman who is about to report me. A guard entry takes the impact meant for her throat directly, the same way the very first one did back in the depot yard on night 1, except this time the pack does not break off after losing its leader, it keeps coming. The guard goes down, holding the line long enough for the rest to finish the job, and does not get back up. I feel it go, a cold, final absence through the link where warmth used to sit, gone the way nothing had gone before tonight. No revival, no asterisk. The system does not soften it for me, does not offer a discount on grief, the way it occasionally offers a discount on binds. 1 entry, permanently lost, spent entirely and without negotiation on a stranger's life. Iris stares at the space where it fell, breathing hard, alive because of a choice I made in under a second, for reasons I am still not fully able to explain to myself, let alone to the inspector who was about to file paperwork on me an hour ago. I do not make a speech about it. I crouch by what is left, log the loss the only way the ledger lets me, a name stripped from the roster, and a number that will not climb back up no matter how long I stare at it tonight. 31, I say, quiet, mostly to myself, not 32. She watches me do that arithmetic in complete silence, and something behind her professional composure visibly shifts, the way a locked door shifts when somebody finally finds the right key by accident. You are grieving a count, she says slowly, like she is testing whether the sentence is an insult or an observation. I tell her I am grieving the only way the system currently lets me grieve anything, and that does not make it smaller to me. She does not file the report that night. She tells me so directly, flatly, the way she probably delivers every decision that costs her something professionally. I am not reporting this. Not yet. I want to see what you actually are before I decide what you cost the Conquered. In exchange, she says, I want in. Archive access, quarantine maps, licensing loopholes, all of it, for a cut of whatever this operation is building toward. I do not trust you. I am simply choosing to be useful to you instead of against you for now. I agree before I have finished thinking through what I am agreeing to, mostly because turning down free intelligence from someone who already has every reason to burn me down feels like a worse gamble than accepting it and staying alert. Vesper's voice arrives dry and immediate the second Iris turns to gather her things. 2 women in 1 week have decided you are worth betting their own careers on, she says. I am starting to wonder if it is the crest or the corpses that people find so persuasive. Neither, I tell her, silently. I think it might just be that nobody has bothered showing either of them a better option in a very long time. Vesper does not answer that one, which from her, I am learning, usually means I have accidentally said something true. The payoff arrives faster than I expect. She pulls 3 warehouse locations off the quarantine maps that same night. Sites flagged unsafe on paper, but, according to her own field notes, simply never fully searched by anyone with a reason to bother. Untouched, she says, sliding the map across to me. Grain, tools, medical stock, sealed since the 2nd week of the Halloween. Nobody has claimed them because nobody with proper equipment wanted to risk the walk. You have equipment that does not mind the risk. I look at the 3 marked sites and feel something that is not quite hope and not quite relief. Something closer to the specific, cautious arithmetic of a man who has learned the hard way that every gift this city offers arrives with a bill attached somewhere underneath it. We spend the rest of the night planning around it, and somewhere in the planning, the way station idea takes shape properly for the first time. Small relay points between the reach and the new caches, each one anchored by an infrastructure entry instead of a full garrison. 4 routes instead of 1 single fragile line. Delivery time cut roughly in half the moment the first relay goes active, and territory that effectively doubles in reach without claiming a single additional block of actual ground. Iris walks the route lines with a fingertip across her own map, marking each proposed relay with a small, neat cross, the same careful hand she used counting crates 2 hours earlier. This one sits inside a blind spot in our patrol schedule, she says. Nobody official will notice it for weeks if you build it low. I ask her if she is comfortable telling me exactly how to stay invisible from her own employer. She does not look up from the map. I told you, she says. I am choosing to be useful to you instead of against you. For now, do not make me regret the wording twice in one night. Celine arrives at the Reach the next morning to find Iris already reviewing manifests at our own table, and the temperature in the room drops by a noticeable degree before either woman says a single word to the other directly. A Concord badge at this table, Celine says flat, to me and not to Iris. That is either very brave or very stupid, and I have not decided which yet. Iris does not look up from the manifest. Neither, she says. Ask me again in a month. Celine does not push it further, which I have started to understand is its own kind of professional respect between 2 women who both spent years reading a room before deciding whether to trust anyone standing in it. Later, alone with me for exactly as long as it takes to hand off a delivery manifest, Celine adds one more line, quiet enough that Iris does not catch it from across the yard. Watch her contacts, not her words, she says. Words are cheap for people who file reports for a living. I tell her I intend to. She studies me a moment longer, like she is deciding whether that answer actually satisfies her, then nods once and goes back to her own ledger without offering anything softer to close the exchange. By the time the relay plan is fully mapped, the ledger shows something I have not seen before. Infrastructure class entries anchored at each way station point. Confident, stationary, doing nothing that looks like combat, and everything that keeps a supply line alive. Territory doubles on paper that night without a single new block formally claimed, which feels like the closest thing to a free win I have had since this whole thing started, right up until Iris says the sentence that ends the evening on a colder note. My office already has a name for this, she tells me. Quiet, serious, none of the earlier calculation left in her voice at all. They are calling it the Cadaver Logistics Ring. There is a task force forming. I do not know yet how much time that actually leaves you. The raid does not wait for the task force Iris warned us about. It comes 3 nights later, at the weakest of our 4 way stations, a converted laundry 2 blocks past the pharmacy, before we have finished reinforcing a single wall of it properly. I am at the Reach itself when it starts, elbow deep in the greenhouse rotation with Corin, entirely unprepared for the sound that comes tearing through the link a half second before Vesper's voice does. Sharp and immediate. Concord Strike Team, she says. No preamble at all. Full gear, not a checkpoint patrol. They hit the laundry relay first. Whoever planned this either got very lucky about our weakest point or somebody told them exactly where to look. I do not have time to consider which. The laundry relay has 4 entries posted. 2 guard and 2 infrastructure, none of them built to hold a coordinated strike team, and I already know, before I finish standing up, that 4 will not be enough on their own. Iris's voice comes through a second radio Vesper is holding, tight and fast. The careful procedural woman from the checkpoint entirely gone, replaced by someone spending her own career in real time to buy us minutes. They moved the timeline up, Iris says. I only just found out myself. You have maybe 10 minutes before that relay is overrun completely. I am sorry. I could not warn you sooner without them noticing I knew to look. 10 minutes. I am already moving before she finishes the sentence, calling the SSS Alpha off wall duty and out through the depot gate at a dead run, the ground itself seeming to flinch slightly under the weight of something that large picking up speed. We have not fought like this before. Not really. Not since that very first night at the dead end with 3 ferals and a soldier that used to be a person. Tonight is different. Tonight there is an actual armed strike team between us and a relay point worth defending. The Alpha hits the Concord line first, and for one brutal, honest moment, it is not effortless at all. Their equipment is real, their training is real, and I feel the strain of the fight through the link like a held breath that will not release. It takes ground anyway, slow and costly, driving a wedge through the strike team's flank, while I bring the rest of the relay's small garrison up to meet the front of it. Guard entries locking shoulder to shoulder across the laundry's narrow entrance. I feel every one of its wounds through the link now, distant but unmistakable. A slow accumulation of damage that no amount of raw rank makes free. Even the Alpha bleeds, in whatever way something like it bleeds, and for the first time I understand that SSS was never a ceiling. It was only a starting number. I have not fully caught my breath from that when the second problem arrives. Engines this time, not footsteps. A column of house-marked vehicles cutting into the same street from the opposite direction, with absolutely no interest in whose fight they are interrupting. Coal Squad, Vesper says, flat, already recalculating the formation without waiting for my order. Cassian's colors. He is not here for the Concord team. He is here for you, and he has apparently decided tonight is as good a night as any to collect. 3 sides now, in one narrow street, none of them coordinated with each other, none of them willing to step back first. The Concord strike team, already bloodied, turns half their attention toward the new arrivals instead of finishing what they started with me. Cassian's soldiers do not distinguish carefully between Hollow and Concord Raider in the opening seconds, and for a handful of terrifying minutes, it is simply fights. 3 separate fights bleeding into each other in a space too narrow for any of them to be fought cleanly. A Coal Squad soldier puts a blade into a Concord Raider's shoulder by pure reflex, mistaking the uniform for Hollow in the dark, in the noise. And the 2 forces that arrived hating only me spend a full ugly minute hating each other instead, which is the only reason any of us survived the opening exchange. Smoke rolls low across the street from something that caught fire early in the fighting, and for a while, I cannot tell my own entries from the enemy's dead by silhouette alone. Only by the specific, wrong way something moves when it belongs to me and not to either army. Vesper calls the shape of it before I can. Guard entries anchoring the choke point at the laundry doorway. A fighter peeling wide along the rooftops to hit the Concord flank from above. Scout entries feeding her a live picture of every gap opening and closing in real time. It is not clean. Nothing about tonight is clean. But it is coordinated in a way neither of the other 2 forces manages to match. Each of my entries doing exactly the job its class was built for, while Cassian's soldiers and the Concord team simply throw numbers at the problem. A guard falls back exactly 2 paces when the fighter needs the gap, then closes it again the instant the opening is used. No order spoken aloud, no hesitation at all. The whole small formation moving like something that has rehearsed this fight 100 times, even though it is not. Not once, not really. It is Vesper's voice under all of it, even when she says nothing out loud. The shape of her attention running through every entry at once, reading the street the way she once read a feral pack's weak point in under 3 seconds flat back at the depot door. I see Cassian himself only once during the worst of it, shouting orders from behind his own line, and for one strange second I do not recognize him at all. Older somehow. Harder. Nothing left of the boy who laughed first at my ceremony. The moment does not last. A Concord Raider breaks past his flank in the confusion and drives him back against the laundry's collapsed loading dock, blade raised, and Cassian's own soldiers are too far, too scattered, too busy with their own fights to reach him in time. I do not decide to send the Alpha. I do not remember deciding anything at all in that particular second. It simply moves, faster than I have ever felt it move, and puts itself between my half-brother and the blade meant for his throat. The Raider does not survive contact with something that size moving that fast. Cassian does. He stares up at the thing standing over him, chest heaving, utterly uncomprehending for a full 3 seconds before his brain manages to connect the shape of it to the crest still stitched to my collar. His own soldiers see it too. Every one of them close enough to watch their commander get pulled out of a killing blow by the very hollow force he rode out here specifically to destroy. Nobody says anything. The fighting around them does not even fully pause, but they see it. Cassian opens his mouth, and for a moment I think he is going to say something, thank the thing that just saved him, or curse it, or scream, and instead nothing comes out at all, his whole face caught somewhere between the 2 options and settling on neither. The Alpha does not linger over him. It turns back into the fight the instant the threat is cleared, indifferent to whatever Cassian's face is doing. And something about that indifference lands on him harder than any insult I could have shouted across the smoke would have managed. A Concord Raider near the loading dock sees it as well, already on his knees with his hands raised, having apparently decided sometime in the last 2 minutes that surrender was the smarter play against whatever this actually is. He does not look away either. The remaining Concord line breaks first, falling back in a ragged retreat that is not quite a rout but is not far from one. And Cassian's Coal Squad, leaderless for the handful of seconds it takes their commander to remember how to stand, does not press the advantage they briefly had. The laundry holds. The relay holds. I stand in the wreckage of a street that 3 separate forces tried to claim in the same 10 minutes, breathing hard, and realize that somewhere in the chaos, somebody started calling my courier entries by a name that was never meant kindly. Hollow Courier, one of the surrendered raiders, mutters to nobody, staring at the crate stacks the relay never stopped guarding, even mid-battle. I hear it, and something in me decides, on the spot, that I am done letting other people name what I build. That is the name, I say, loud enough for whoever is still listening on either side of this wreckage to hear it clearly. Hollow Courier. Say it however you like, it still delivers on time. I do not wait to see whether the joke lands. I am already moving to the wounded. The ledger spends the next hour doing something it has not done since that very first chaotic night, binding entry after entry out of the raid's own spoils, wounded Concord equipment, and abandoned Coal Squad gear turning into ranked numbers faster than I can properly track them. Core breaks level 20 somewhere in the middle of it, a hard, sudden lurch behind my ribs that nearly puts me on the ground. And the very first non-alpha SS entry logs itself off a Concord specialist, who very clearly did not expect tonight to end this way for them. Vesper reads the tally off to me while I am still catching my breath against the laundry wall, because apparently that has become her job too, alongside everything else. 9 new entries off the field alone, she says. 1 SS, 2 A rank, the rest scattered lower, but every one of them useful. Level 20 does not feel the way level 3 felt on the first night, warm and enormous and new. It feels heavier, like something settling permanently into a frame that has to carry it from now on. And I decide I would rather have the weight than go back to being light and empty, the way I was the night they threw me out. Celine arrives at the relay within the hour, Common's militia at her back in full view of everyone still standing in that street, and does not hesitate this time the way she hesitated at the depot gate all those weeks ago. Ward Point Commons stands with the Hollow Courier Charter, she announces, loud, deliberate, meant to be repeated by everyone who heard it, openly, not provisionally, not weakly reviewed. If that costs us with Concord, it costs us. We have made worse trades for less. Her own people do not flinch at the declaration, which tells me more about how far the last several weeks have actually moved things than any single number on any single counter could have managed to say on its own. One of her militia, an older man who I recognized from the very first caravan 3 weeks back, the one who watched my guard entries lift crates without dropping one and said nothing about it at the time, finally speaks up now, loud enough for the street to hear him clearly. About time somebody official said it out loud, he says, and there is a rough, tired laugh that moves through the gathered militia at that. The specific kind of laugh that comes after people have been quietly agreeing about something for weeks without anyone brave enough to say it first. By morning, Vesper has the map redrawn a 3rd time, and this version does something the last 2 never quite managed. The 5 separate blocks we have been holding and defending piecemeal finally read, on every outside surveillance map anyone bothers to check, as one solid contiguous ward. Not a depot with satellites anymore. A ward, small, by the standards of an actual house holding, but whole, connected, defensible as a single shape instead of 5 fragile pieces someone could pick off one at a time if they found the right night to try it. Vesper traces the new outline with one finger, the same way she traced the first hand-drawn map on the back of a requisition form, what feels like a lifetime ago now. We went from a depot to a ward in 11 days, she says. I would like that on record somewhere, for whoever reads this later. I ask her who exactly she thinks is going to be reading it. She shrugs, unbothered. Somebody always reads it eventually, she says. History or Concord paperwork. Rarely much difference between the two in my experience. 2 districts away, in the same study with the same working lamps, Cassian gives his account of the night to a father who has not yet decided how much of it to believe. The Hollow forces attacked without provocation, he says, voice steady, eyes not quite meeting Dorian's. We were conducting a lawful patrol near house-adjacent territory, he continues, and the disgraced Knoll Sun's creatures struck first. My men can attest to it. I barely escaped with my life. He does not mention the blade at his own throat, or whose Hollow turned it aside. He tells himself, walking back to his quarters afterward, that the lie is not really a lie, only a correction of emphasis. The kind of small editorial mercy every house officer applies to a report before it reaches a father who has never once forgiven an honest failure quietly. What he does not tell himself not even alone, in the dark, where it would cost him nothing to admit it, is that some small, ugly part of him has already started wondering what it would take to get that same hollow to move that fast for him on purpose, and not by accident of blood. Dorian listens to the entire account without interrupting once. Hands folded, expression unreadable in the particular way that has unsettled Cassian since childhood, long before either of them had any reason to be standing on opposite sides of anything that mattered. He does not challenge the story outright, but he does not fully close the file on it either, setting it aside instead with the same flat precision he once used on a glyph that read null and meant it, filed for later rather than trusted completely tonight. The confirmation Dorian has actually been waiting for arrived separately, through channels Cassian's account had nothing to do with. A field report from the Cull Squad's own signal officer, noting a registration ping recovered from the battlefield itself, cross-checked twice against house records before anyone dared file it. Registration confirmed, the report reads, plain and final. Kalen Ashvale, alive, operating in Sector 9 under an unregistered command signature. Dorian reads the line once, sets the page down with the same care he once used tearing a crest from a coat, and says nothing at all. He sits with it a long while after the servant who delivered it has gone, lamp burning low, the study around him exactly as quiet as it was the night he stripped the crest off his own son's coat in front of an entire hall and called it necessary. The morning after, the ward unifies on every outside map anyone bothers to check. I am still riding high enough off the wind that I make the one mistake Vesper has been quietly waiting for me to make since the first night we met. There are 40-some prisoners taken in the raid's aftermath. Wounded Concord Raiders and a handful of Cull Squad stragglers, too injured to retreat with the rest. And instead of pacing the binding out over days the way I have every other time, I decide to do it all at once tonight. We are ahead, I tell Vesper, when she raises an eyebrow at the number. We should stay ahead. She does not argue outright, which I will understand later was less agreement than her own exhaustion finally catching up with both of us after a night that cost us more than either of us had counted yet. I feel good tonight, in a way I have not let myself feel since the gate shut behind me. Level 20 behind my ribs, an award on every outside map, and a brother who finally looked at me like a person instead of an insult. I want more of that feeling. That is the whole confession, plainly. It is not strategy driving my hand through that binding session. It is appetite, the specific, dangerous kind that shows up right after a win, convinces you the rules that governed you yesterday no longer apply tonight. And I do not once stop to ask myself whether that feeling has ever once been trustworthy before. Entry after entry logs in, faster than I have ever bound before. The ledger climbing in a way that feels less like counting now, and more like falling, momentum doing the deciding instead of judgment. And somewhere past the 30th new bind, a warning flickers at the edge of my vision. It is small, a single line, gone before I can properly read it. The kind of thing easy to mistake for a glitch in a system that has never once fully explained its own rules to me. I do not stop to ask what it meant. I keep binding. That is the mistake. Not the binding itself, the not asking. It finds us that night, hours after the last entry logs in, and I have finally let myself sleep for the first time in 2 days. It does not announce itself the way the Concord raid did. There is no radio warning, no scout report, nothing Vesper or Iris could have caught coming. It simply happens, all at once, from inside the ward instead of outside it. The weakest loyalty entries, the 2 chain-scarred survivors salvaged from Draven's camp back in Part 5, go feral within seconds of each other, some fragile thread holding them steady simply snapping under a weight it was never built to carry. I wake to screaming that is not human and not quite hollow either, a sound I have never heard my own ledger make before. And by the time I am on my feet, the cascade has already started spreading, one destabilized entry's panic bleeding into the ones bound closest to it through the same link that is supposed to hold everything steady. The greenhouse goes first, which I do not expect and should have. The farmer entries, gentle and patient every single day since the first garden bed went in, turn without warning, hands that have spent weeks in soil now tearing through the very rows they planted. Food security collapsing before I even reached the yard. I reached the loading yard to find rows that took 4 days to build and 12 to properly yield, torn apart in what looks like minutes. Dirt and root and shredded green stalk scattered across ground that used to hold the one number in this whole story I actually trusted to hold steady. It is not rage driving them. That is somehow the worst part. There is no fury in the way they move, only a blank, mechanical panic. Entries doing damage without any of the intent that would at least let me be angry at something, instead of just afraid of what I built without fully understanding it. I feel Vesper's fear through the link before I hear her voice, sharp and sudden, and then I feel something worse, a pressure building behind it that has nothing to do with fear and everything to do with a channel carrying more than it was ever designed to carry at once. She goes down mid-sentence, radio clattering out of her hand, body folding the way a puppet folds when every string is cut at once. And for one terrifying second, I cannot tell through the link whether she is unconscious or whether I have lost her entirely, permanently, the way I lost the guard entry at the checkpoint. I crossed the yard faster than I have ever moved in my life, faster than the night the Alpha first saved me, and dropped to my knees beside her in the dirt, hands on her face, her throat, anywhere I can find a pulse. And for 3 full seconds, that pulse simply does not answer me at all. It comes back thin and fast under my fingers, and I have never once in my life been so grateful for something so small and so fragile and so entirely outside my control. Stay, I tell her, uselessly, since she cannot hear me. Since telling a body to stay has never once actually kept anyone anywhere. I do not have time to find out gently. 2 of the cascading entries are close enough now to reach the greenhouse workers. Corin and Dessa both still asleep in the worker shelter. And there is exactly one way I know how to stop a cascade before it reaches people who cannot defend themselves. I do it myself. Not through an order relayed to some other entry, not through anything that lets me stand at a safe distance. I close the distance and end both of the cascading entries with my own hands, the same hands that bound them into existence in the first place, and I feel every part of it. It is not like the checkpoint loss. That one happened to me, sudden and total. A door slamming shut before I could brace for it. This one I choose, deliberately, one motion at a time, and something about choosing it makes it land heavier, not lighter, the way I expected it might. Both of them came from Draven's camp. Both of them wore chain scars I never got the chance to let heal properly before tonight asked more of them than a still recovering body could carry. I think, kneeling there afterward, a Vesper crouched beside them days ago, saying only that they were somebody before all of this. I do not know their names. Draven never gave them any worth keeping, and I never had the time to ask what they were called before whatever this world made them. That absence sits in my chest afterward, heavier than almost anything else that happens tonight. Heavier even than the greenhouse. Corin is awake by the time it is over, standing in the sheltered doorway with Dessa behind him, both of them staring at me across the wreckage of a greenhouse that fed this ward 12 days deep in supply only yesterday morning, and neither of them says a single word. I do not need them to. I can read it plainly enough on both their faces. The same fear that used to live there in the first hour they ever worked beside a farmer entry. Except this time it is not fear of what I built. It is fear of what I built almost getting them killed in their sleep. Celine arrives at dawn with 3 of her people, summoned by a runner who clearly did not know how to soften what he had seen, and she walks the ruined greenhouse in complete silence for a long time before she finally turns to look at me directly. This is what I was afraid of the first morning I found this depot, she says, quiet, not cruel, which somehow makes it worse. Not that your creatures would turn on us, that they would turn on themselves and take whatever happened to be standing nearby along with them. I do not have a clean answer for her. I do not try to build one. Iris arrives an hour later with her own archive notes spread across the same table Celine and I are still standing at, and finally gives the disaster a shape I can work with instead of just survive. The anchor cap does not scale the way you think it does, she says, laying out pages of old Concord field data nobody bothered publishing widely. It is not linear. Past a certain raw count, every new bind costs disproportionately more than the last, and nobody warns tamers because nobody wants tamers slowing down. That is why 15 cost more than 14 should have, back when the reach was still just a depot and a garden bed. It was never a glitch. It was the rule working exactly as intended, quietly, until enough weight built up behind it to finally break something, instead of just flickering a warning nobody read in time. I stand in front of Celine, in front of Corin and Dessa, in front of my own people, and say the one sentence I have not let myself say out loud since the gate shut behind me on the first night of all of this. I did not know the limit. I should have asked. That is on me, not the system, not any of you. It does not feel like weakness the way I always assumed admitting a limit would feel. It feels, oddly, like the first entirely honest thing I have said to a crowd since the ceremony that started all of this. And something in Celine's posture eases, fractionally, at hearing it said plainly instead of excused. Vesper wakes near midday, pale, furious at her own body for failing first, and refuses to stay resting for longer than it takes her to drink the water someone puts in her hands. By evening, she has already sketched out the beginning of an answer nobody asked her to build. A circuit breaker, she calls it, tracing the shape of it on the same requisition form she once used to name the reach. Name tier entries carry more of the link's load than raw entries do. If we route the cascade through us deliberately, on our terms, before it ever reaches this point again, it does not have to reach everyone else first. I ask her if that means the next cascade routes through her again, and whether she has actually thought through what that would cost her body a second time. She looks at me steadily, still pale, still recovering, and says that is exactly what it means, and that she is building it anyway. She built it out of the exact thing that nearly killed her, and she is entirely unsentimental about saying so out loud. It should have existed before tonight, she says. It did not, because nobody thought the system would ever actually hit its own limit this hard. Now we know. Now we build for it. The final tally comes in slow and unglamorous. Nothing like the bright rush after the midpoint raid. 30 entries purged from the roster entirely. Gone the way the checkpoint guard is gone. No revival, no asterisk. And yet, when Vesper runs the average rank across what remains, the number has actually risen. Quality over raw count, she says, flat, and does not dress it up as a victory, because it is not one. It is a trade we did not choose to make on purpose, paid for in entries that cannot be replaced, and a night neither Corin nor Dessa nor Celine's people will forget. However this story ends. 2 districts away, Cassian hears a distorted version of the same night within hours. Like rumor always outruns fact in a city with too many frightened people and not enough working radios, and does not correct a single exaggeration in it before he brings the story straight to his father. His own monsters turned on him, Cassian tells Dorian, pressing the advantage with the specific patience of a man who has been waiting weeks for exactly this kind of opening. The warden cannot even control what he built. Whatever mercy you are considering, father, consider it before the whole district burns because of his mistake instead. Dorian does not answer him immediately, the way he never answers Cassian immediately anymore. But this time, for the first time since the registration report reached his desk, I imagine he does not simply file the account away either. Somewhere in that quiet study, a decision that has been waiting starts, finally, to move. I spend the 2 days after the backlash refusing to bind a single new entry, which is its own kind of restraint I did not know I had in me, and instead sit with Iris's archive pages spread across the table until the numbers stop looking like noise. She brings me everything Concord ever quietly logged on Anchor Scaling, old field reports nobody published widely, half of it written by tamers who apparently learned this exact lesson the hard way long before I did, some of them clearly not surviving the lesson at all. The raw pattern is ugly and consistent. Cost per entry climbs faster than the entry count itself. A curve, not a line, exactly the way it hit us at 15, and then again, catastrophically, somewhere past 60. Stack enough raw bodies together, and the tax eventually eats the whole point of stacking them. I map it out on scrap paper the way I used to lay out a house's accounts, in what already feels like a different man's life entirely. 10 entries, reasonable cost. 20, noticeably worse. 40, the exact wall we hit 2 nights ago, dressed up as a warning flicker I was too giddy to properly read. Vesper watches me redraw the same curve 3 times, checking my own arithmetic the way she checks everything now. Out loud, on principle. You are looking for a way around a wall, the system itself built on purpose, she says. That is either very clever or exactly the kind of thinking that got us 30 entries deep into a grave 2 nights ago. Probably both, I tell her, and for the first time since the backlash, I hear something almost like her old dry amusement return to her voice, brief, careful, testing whether the ground under this particular joke is actually safe to stand on yet. But buried 3 pages deep in a report some exhausted Concord analyst clearly filed and forgot about, there is a footnote that changes the shape of everything I thought I understood about my own ledger. Mixed class groupings do not follow the same curve. They follow a flatter one. I test the theory the only way I actually trust anything now, by building it and watching the number move in front of me instead of taking anyone's word for it, mine included. I pull 1 guard, 1 farmer, and 1 courier out of their separate rosters and bind them together into a single structure the ledger has never asked for before tonight. The system does not fight me on it. It simply logs the new grouping, and the anchor cost readout for all 3 entries combined drops, visibly, immediately, lower than what any one of them cost separately standing alone in their old assignment an hour ago. I stare at the number for a long moment, the same disbelieving stare I gave entry 1 on the very first night. Except this time, the disbelief is not about survival. It is about the specific, quiet satisfaction of finding a real exploit sitting inside the rules instead of some desperate trick bolted outside of them. Nobody handed this to me. No system window explained it in 3 helpful lines. It was sitting buried in a report some tired analyst filed and forgot, and it took a night of grief-fueled analysis and Iris's stolen archive access to actually dig it back out into something usable. That distinction matters more to me than I expect it to. Every other advantage in this story arrived because something in me refused to look away at the worst possible moment. A waterfall, a dying alpha, a woman pinned under a slab. This is the first one that arrived because I simply sat down and did the work properly. Vesper reads the number over my shoulder and does not say anything for a second, which from her is usually the loudest possible reaction. Then she says, slowly, that if this holds its scale, we do not need fewer entries to be stronger. We need better arranged ones. We do not sleep that night either. Every entry in the Reach gets pulled from its old, single-class assignment and rebuilt into a cell. 3 or 4 mixed roles bound together under one shared structure, guard beside farmer, beside courier, beside scout. The whole roster reorganized block by block until dawn. It is not free labor, and it is not instant. Every cell has to be walked through manually, tested, corrected when a pairing does not settle cleanly, and by the time the sky starts going gray, I am running on nothing but the specific stubborn energy of a man who has found something worth staying awake for. Vesper takes command of the first full cell network herself, not because I hand it to her, but because by the 3rd hour, it is simply obvious that directing 4 mixed formations at once through command link is her problem to solve, not mine. And she solves it the way she solves everything, without asking permission first. I watch her run the network from the depot roof, silent, focused, moving entire cells across the ward with barely a flicker of visible effort, and understand, watching her do it, that whatever this war eventually becomes, it was never going to be won by raw force alone. It was always going to be won by whoever thought clearer under pressure. Celine hears about the cell discovery the next morning and does something I do not expect at all. She takes the same logic straight back to her own commons crews, breaking her fixed labor teams apart and rebuilding them around mixed skill sets instead of single specialties. The exact same principle applied to living hands instead of bound ones. 1 cook, 1 carpenter, 1 runner, 1 medic, she says, laying it out on the same table Iris's reports still cover. A team that can only cook falls apart the moment cooking is not the problem. A team that can do 4 things badly outlasts a team that can do 1 thing perfectly and nothing else at all. It works for her the same way it worked for me. Her first mixed crew clears the supply run in half the time her old specialist teams needed. Not because anyone got faster individually, but because nobody has to stand idle waiting for a specialist who is not there yet. She tells me about it afterward, with the specific satisfaction of someone who solved the problem entirely on her own terms, without needing my ledger or my entries or my crest to do it. I did not need a system window to see it, she says, pointed but not unkind. I just needed to watch my own people work for once instead of managing them from a distance. I do not have a clever response to that, mostly because she is right. And I have started to notice that most of the people I trust lately share that particular habit of being right at my expense in ways I cannot argue with even when I want to. The first cellway station goes live 2 days later, the same relay point Draven's rumor chaos indirectly endangered weeks ago, and the comparison lands harder than any speech I could give about it. Pre-backlash, it ran on 6 raw entries at a steady but expensive cost. Tonight it runs on 4 cell-bound entries, faster, for less. Vesper reads the 2 numbers side by side out loud, once, and does not editorialize beyond that. She does not have to. The number does all the talking this time, exactly the way numbers have done most of the convincing in this story, since the very first night I climbed from level 1 to level 3 in a dead end. Word of the comparison reaches an old commons elder named Harlan before I do, a man who has been politely skeptical of the whole alliance since the very first caravan. Never hostile, never warm either, simply watching from a careful distance the way Celine's own haulers did in part 4. He finds me alone at the depot gate, not in front of anyone, which I understand later was deliberate on his part. He asks to see the way station numbers himself, reads them twice the way I once read entry 1 twice, and says quietly that he has buried 3 neighbors this year to systems that promised efficiency and delivered excuses instead. This one delivered the efficiency, he says, handing the page back. I am not saying I trust you, boy. I am saying I trust the number, and the number is the first honest thing anyone has shown this district in longer than I care to count. He does not say anything else and does not need to. He turns to leave, then stops, halfway through the gate, and adds one more line without quite looking back at me to say it. My neighbors did not die because the systems that failed them were cruel, he says. They died because the systems lied about what they could actually do. Do not ever let yours start lying to you, boy. Not even to be kind about it. I tell him I will not. I mean it more than most promises I have made since the gate shut behind me, however many weeks ago that was now, though I have long since lost the exact count. Not every gain arrives clean this week. Draven resurfaces 2 blocks from our newest relay, thinner than he was in Part 5, still nursing whatever the backlash rumors have done to his own already cracked reputation, and finds 3 of my frightened ex-workers before Vesper's scouts do. No limits with me, he tells them, according to the runner who brings word back to the Reach afterward. No backlash, no anchor tax, just power, exactly as much as you can carry, and no clever tamer's arithmetic pretending it is somehow better to hold back on purpose. 2 of the 3 go with him anyway, frightened enough by what they witnessed during the backlash that Draven's flawed promise sounds safer than my honest one for now, and I do not chase them down or argue. I let them go, because forcing loyalty was never the method I chose in the first place, and I am not about to start now out of wounded pride. Vesper wants to send a cell after them, quietly, just to be sure Draven does not do to them exactly what he did to the 2 chain-scarred entries I destroyed with my own hands 2 nights ago. I tell her no. If they choose wrong, they get to choose wrong, and dragging them back by force would only prove Draven's whole argument correct in front of everyone still watching. She does not love the answer, but she does not fight me on it either, which I am starting to recognize as her own particular way of admitting I might actually be right about something for once, without ever having to say the words out loud where I could enjoy hearing them. Iris arrives that same evening with news that sharpens the whole Concord thread from a vague, general threat into something with my own name specifically written across the top of it. This is not the logistics ring case anymore, she tells me, flat, serious. They have opened a file with your registration number as the primary subject. Personally, not the operation, you. I ask her what that actually changes in practice. Everything, she says. A ring gets shut down eventually, on somebody's schedule, when somebody gets around to it. A named subject gets prioritized, tracked, built into a career case for whichever officer closes it first. You just became somebody's promotion. She says the word promotion like it costs her something to say it out loud. And I remember, not for the first time, that every piece of intelligence she hands me is intelligence she is choosing not to hand to the very office that still, technically, signs whatever passes for her pay these days. I ask her, not for the first time either, why she keeps choosing this side of the ledger instead of the safer one. She thinks about it longer than usual before answering. Because the safer side stopped feeling honest the day I watched you count a dead entry by number instead of walking away from it, she says. I am not in the habit of unlearning that kind of thing once I have seen it. By the time the reorganization finishes settling into something like a rhythm, the ledger reads smaller than its Part 7 peak, fewer raw entries total than the night the ward first unified. And yet, core climbs from level 20 to level 28 over the same stretch, a number that should not be possible under the old raw count logic at all. Efficiency beats mass, Vesper says, tracing the 2 curves side by side on her requisition form map, old count against new. We do not need to be the biggest army in this city. We need to be the best arranged one. I decide I like that sentence enough to say it back to her twice before the night is over, standing at the depot gate afterward, looking out over a ward that started as a single locked door 3 weeks ago. I catch myself thinking, for the first time since the waterfall of rain that started all of this, in terms bigger than simple survival. Not just holding this ground, building something the whole city eventually has to reckon with. The thought does not get long to settle before a house courier reaches the gate. Formal seal, formal wording, the kind of letter that has clearly been drafted and redrafted by someone who wanted every word defensible later. House Ashvale, it reads, formally summons Kaelin Ashvale to appear before the Blood Council. Vesper reads it over my shoulder a second time, slower, and says the part I am already thinking but had not let myself say out loud yet. They are not hunting you quietly anymore, she says. They are doing it in front of witnesses now. That is either a mistake on their part, or it is not a threat at all. It is an invitation to a trap. Do not go, Vesper says. Flat, immediate. The first time I say the summons out loud in front of both her and Celine together. Walking into a council hall on their invitation is walking into the one building in this city built entirely around their rules, not yours. Celine disagrees before Vesper has finished the sentence, which I am learning is roughly how these two conduct most conversations now. Respectful and entirely unwilling to simply defer to the other's read of a situation neither of them fully controls. Ignoring a formal house summons gives them exactly the excuse they are looking for, Celine says. Refuse to appear, and every account of tonight becomes the Knoll son too cowardly or too guilty to face his own family. Go, and at least the story gets told with you standing in the room. They are both right, which is somehow worse than either of them being wrong. I sit with both arguments longer than either woman probably expects me to, because the old version of me, the one who stood silent while a crest got torn off his coat, would have simply done whatever felt safest. Vesper watches me weigh it and adds one more line, quieter than her first. If you go and it is a trap, she says, I am not going to be able to reach you fast enough from here to matter. That is the actual argument, not politics, distance. I tell her I know and that I'm going anyway, and she does not look happy about either half of that answer. Celine, for her part, does not soften her case to make it easier to hear. If you hide from this now, she says, you spend the rest of this war explaining an absence instead of an argument. I would rather stand in a bad room and be seen than win a debate nobody outside this yard ever gets to witness. I decide to go, not as a petitioner, not with my head down the way I walked out through that gate in the rain. I go with proof, a ward on the map, a cell network that survived a public stress test nobody handed us, numbers that argue my case better than any speech I could give in that hall. We do not get far into planning the trip before the decision gets tested sooner than expected. Word reaches the Reach that afternoon that Draven, cornered and increasingly desperate since Part 9's poaching attempt cost him more followers than it gained, has hit a caravan directly in the open market square. Not a back alley this time. Not a quiet camp 2 sectors east, where only a frightened trader would ever see what he actually does to the things he claims to control. The market square, at midday, in front of every Commons resident who happened to be shopping for whatever passes for groceries in this city now. I am close enough to reach it in minutes. Cell entries already moving before I have finished processing the report, and I arrive to find Draven exactly where Part 5's ghost would put him. One hand locked on a chained Hollow's collar, screaming something into it that is not a command so much as a demand. Pain is honest, he shouts, to the crowd this time, not just to me. Like a man repeating a sermon he has started to suspect nobody believes anymore, but cannot stop delivering anyway. Watch what soft tamers will not show you. This is what real control actually costs. He overloads it in front of everyone. The same violent burst of light I watched kill a boy named Finn 2 sectors east weeks ago. Except this time, a dozen market vendors and shoppers are close enough to be in the blast radius. And this time, my cell hollow are already moving to intercept before the light even finishes tearing loose. It is not effortless. I feel the strain of it clearly through the link. 3 cells coordinating at once under real pressure. Guard bodies absorbing what they can. Fighter and Scout reading gaps the way Vesper trained them to read gaps 2 weeks ago in a single desperate overnight rebuild. A stall collapses under a guard's shoulder as it shoves 2 vendors clear of the blast radius. And for one heartbeat, I genuinely cannot tell whether it is going to hold the weight or go down with them still half underneath it. It holds. Barely. I let myself breathe again only after I see both vendors scramble upright on their own. Vesper's voice cuts through the link, sharp and constant, calling positions the way she called them in the midpoint battle. Except this time, there is no army at her back to lean on. Only 4 cells and a market square full of people who have absolutely no idea they are currently standing inside someone else's tactical formation. Nobody dies. That is the number that matters most to me, standing in the market square afterward with my pulse still hammering. Nobody in that crowd dies. Not one bystander, not one vendor, not one child who wandered too close to watch the commotion like children always do in every city, dead or alive. Draven's overloaded entry turns on him a second time, the exact same flaw, breaking the exact same way it broke in his own camp weeks ago, and this time, there is no isolated street to hide the moment from anyone. The whole square watches him stumble backward from the thing he built with his own cruelty. His remaining followers, 3 of them, do not run after him this time. They stand very still for a moment, watching their own tamer nearly die by his own method, in front of an entire market full of witnesses. And then, one after another, they walk toward my cells instead and simply stop resisting. We want in, the eldest of them says, to Vesper, since I am apparently too busy staring at Draven's retreat to be the one they address first. Hollow Courier, whatever that actually means past a name. We have seen enough of the other option to know which one we would rather bet our lives on now. The crowd does something then that I have genuinely never once heard from a Meridian Street since the hollowing started. Someone near the back, a voice I do not recognize, calls out the warden, loud, clear, and it catches, spreading through the square like fear used to spread before today. Not everyone joins it. I notice the ones who do not, the ones still backing carefully toward the market's edges, faces still uncertain, and I decide not to pretend that reaction does not exist just because the louder one currently drowns it out. Fear does not vanish because a crowd finds something to cheer for instead. An old woman near a fruit stall, close enough that I catch her face clearly, does not chant anything at all. She simply watches, arms wrapped around herself, the particular stillness of someone recalculating a decade of assumptions in real time and finding the process more exhausting than reassuring. I do not blame her for that. I am not sure I would trust me this fast either. Draven does not get far. Common's militia intercept him 2 streets out, and I make the call before Vesper can suggest otherwise. That he goes to Celine's people for judgment, not to my ledger, not to whatever ending an angry crowd might prefer to hand him themselves right now. Handing him over cost me a certain grim satisfaction I will not pretend I did not feel for a moment. It also denies Concord a martyr, denies the rumor mill a story about the warden executing rivals personally, and keeps one more rung of this whole ugly ladder standing for whatever value it holds later. 2 days later, I ride to the Asheville estate with a procession that would have been unthinkable the night they threw me out. Vesper at my side, a cell of my strongest entries flanking the road, and enough witnesses trailing behind that house guards at the gate simply stand aside rather than test the math themselves. The gate is the same gate. I recognize the exact stones I was thrown against in the rain, and there is a strange, quiet satisfaction in walking back through it upright instead of shoved, escorted instead of ejected, though I do not let myself linger on the symmetry longer than the walk itself requires. House staff line the courtyard the way they lined it for the awakening ceremony, and I recognize 2 of the same faces, servants who watched a guard strip a crest off my coat without once meeting my eyes that day. They meet my eyes now. I do not know what to do with that yet, so I simply nod once and keep walking. Vesper stays half a step behind me the entire way, close enough to reach me instantly, far enough to let the house see clearly that I walk into this hall on my own legs, not carried by anyone's protection. It is a small detail. She arranged it deliberately anyway, the way she arranges everything now. Lord Dorian meets us in the same hall where the glyph once burned null over my head, seated at the head of a council table that has clearly been rearranged more than once since word of my arrival reached the estate this morning. He does not rise. He does study me for a long moment before speaking at all. I watch something flicker across his composure the instant the SSS Alpha crosses the threshold behind me. Involuntary, brief, gone almost as fast as it appears, but I catch it, the way I have learned to catch small, true things under the larger performed ones in this family. Cassian speaks before his father does, exactly as I expect him to. He attacked my patrol without provocation, he tells the assembled council. The same account he gave Dorian in private after the midpoint raid, polished now, rehearsed, delivered with the specific confidence of a lie that has survived one telling already. Iris stands near the back of the hall in her Concord uniform, sent as an official observer, and I watch her hear the lie land unchallenged, watch the data she is holding stay exactly where it is, folded and silent in whatever pocket carries it. She does not speak. I do not ask her to. Not yet. I catch her eyes once, briefly, across the length of the hall, and read something complicated in them that I do not have time to properly interpret before she looks away first. Whatever she is holding back tonight, it is costing her something to hold, and I decide, watching her jaw stay tight through the rest of Cassian's account, that I trust the silence more than I would trust an easy contradiction offered too soon. Dorian listens to his son's account the same way he listened to it in private weeks ago, hands folded, expression giving away nothing, though I notice this time that his eyes drift, twice, toward the SSS Alpha standing quiet at my shoulder, as if some part of him is running his own arithmetic underneath the performance. The council deliberates for the better part of an hour and settles on exactly nothing that resembles a real decision. Probationary recognition, the presiding elder finally announces, the word chosen with obvious legal care. The territory known as the Hollow Reach may continue to operate, pending further review, under continued House oversight. It is not a victory. I understand that the moment the word probationary leaves the elder's mouth, it is a door left deliberately ajar, official enough to keep me from becoming a rallying cause, provisional enough that House Ashevale loses nothing by revoking it the instant it becomes convenient to do so. Castian looks almost disappointed by the ruling, as though he expected a cleaner victory to hand his father, and I catch him glancing sideways at Dorian with an expression I recognize uncomfortably well from my own reflection at that ceremony. The look of a son trying to read a verdict that has not fully been rendered yet. Vesper, standing just behind my shoulder through all of it, leans in close enough that only I catch the words. That is not nothing, she murmurs. 11 weeks ago, they would not let you inside the gate at all. Do not mistake a small door for no door. I tell her, I am not mistaking it for anything. I am simply walking through it. I accept it anyway, because a door left ajar is still a door, and I have learned more from Vesper and Celine both than I care to admit about taking whatever imperfect opening the world actually offers, instead of holding out for the clean one that may never arrive at all. As the hall empties, I catch one last thing I was not looking for. Lady Mirren Ashvale, silent through the entire session, seated at her husband's left hand, exactly where she has apparently sat through every council meeting for years, finally lifts her eyes and looks directly at me. It is not contempt. I brace for contempt, the same flavor Cassian has worn since the ceremony, and instead, I find something else entirely. Something that looks, for one unguarded second before she looks away again, uncomfortably close to fear. I do not know why. I file it away, the way I file everything now, for later. She has said perhaps 3 words in my presence across 2 visits to this hall, none of them addressed to me directly, and yet something about the way she looked away just now sits wrong in my chest the entire ride back to the Reach. A loose thread I cannot yet find the other end of. Probationary is apparently all the paperwork a cell network needs to move fast. Within a week of the council's grudging non-decision, we push into 2 new districts, relay points going up faster than I can properly track them. A blur of nights I mostly remember as numbers now. Vesper runs the expansion like she has been doing this her whole life, instead of a couple of months of it, dispatching cells to secure ground while I am still finishing the sentence describing where I think we should send them, which I have stopped finding insulting and started finding genuinely useful. I spend most of the week on the parts of the work nobody ever sees, walking new district lines with cell escorts, meeting the handful of residents who never left when everyone else did, listening to what they actually need instead of assuming a garden bed and a wall solves every version of the same problem. Some of it is water again. A cracked cistern 3 blocks past the old pharmacy that nobody has trusted to drink from in weeks. Some of it is simpler, an old man who just wants somebody to confirm out loud that his street still counts as part of something, instead of forgotten ground between 2 more important places. I do not have a system window for either problem. I have cells and labor and the same stubborn attention to detail that once made me useless at everything a house heir was supposed to care about, and that combination solves more than I expected it to, 1 cracked cistern at a time. The first true city caravan arrives on a morning I almost sleep through, traders from beyond Common's territory entirely, drawn by rumor of a route that actually delivers on schedule in a city where schedules mean nothing anymore. They pay in gold, real gold, counted and weighed and handed over without argument. I watch Vesper log the number and feel something shift in how I think about all of this. Coin never mattered much to a man who spent months measuring survival in days of food and anchor points. Gold sitting in an actual ledger, growing instead of vanishing, is a different kind of arithmetic entirely. The caravan's lead trader, a sharp-eyed woman who introduces herself only as a representative of a consortium too new to have a proper name yet, asks me directly what I intend to do with a route this valuable once the novelty wears off. I tell her the truth, that I have not fully decided yet, and she seems to respect the honesty more than she would have respected a rehearsed answer. She leaves with a standing order and a promise to return within the month, and Vesper watches her cart disappear down the relay road, with the particular satisfaction of someone watching a number she personally fought for finally start compounding on its own. She does not stop at logging it. By the end of the week, she has drafted a full defense doctrine for the ward as a whole. Not the depot's old improvised response to whatever threat happened to be closest, but layered rings, dedicated cells assigned to specific quadrants, response times calculated the way she once calculated a feral pack's kill radius. This is not the depot anymore, she tells me, laying the doctrine out on the same table Iris's reports still occupy half of. You cannot defend a ward like you defended one door. I am not asking your opinion on this. I am telling you, it is already built. I decide I like her better when she stops asking. She walks me through it anyway, out of habit more than permission. Rings of response radius drawn concentrically outward from 3 anchor points instead of 1. Reserve cells held back deliberately instead of thrown at the first alarm. A lesson she says she learned watching me nearly bleed us dry, doing exactly that during the backlash. I do not argue with the comparison, mostly because it is accurate, and because watching her turn her own near death into a doctrine this careful tells me more about how far she has come from the furious, frightened woman I pulled out from under a slab of concrete than any conversation between us ever could on its own. Celine's Commons logistics fold into the shared route map that same week, Formally this time, not caravan by caravan the way it started back in part 3. Her haulers and my couriers now run the same schedule off the same board, and the combined reach doubles again almost overnight, the way numbers do once two separate systems finally agree to share one spine. I find Milo among the new junior couriers on my second walk through the expanded relay board, older by weeks that clearly did more for him than they did for the rest of us. Steady on his feet, arguing cheerfully with an older courier about a delivery order neither of them is technically allowed to change. He does not recognize me at first, focused entirely on winning his argument, and when Celine points me out to him, he goes still for exactly 1 second before grinning the specific, unguarded grin of a kid who has apparently decided the world stopped being quite as frightening as it used to be. He is taller than he was in part 3, or maybe just standing straighter. Shoulders no longer curled in around whatever fever nearly took him that first week. The older courier beside him rolls her eyes at whatever argument they were having and walks off, leaving Milo grinning at me alone in the middle of the relay board. I do not make it a moment. He does not want it to be one either, judging by how fast he goes back to arguing about the delivery order, and I let him, because the quiet proof of him standing there upright and arguing about paperwork means more to me than any speech either of us could manage. The map itself, redrawn again that same week, finally shows what all of this actually adds up to. The 5 blocks that became one ward back at the midpoint have grown into a genuine multi-district territory, larger by outside measurement than 3 of the minor houses still holding formal council seats. Word of that comparison apparently reaches those houses faster than I expect. Quiet couriers start arriving at the Reach's gate carrying trade proposals instead of threats. Careful, non-committal language that nonetheless treats me, for the first time since the gate shut behind me, as a player worth courting rather than a scandal worth ignoring. None of them sign their own names to the proposals directly, which tells its own story. They want the trade without the public association, access to a route that outperforms anything their own houses currently run, without having to explain to their peers why they are doing business with a disgraced null son turned ward holder. I answer every one of them the same careful way. Terms plain, nothing hidden, no favors owed beyond the paper itself, and let them decide on their own timeline whether pride or profit wins out first. Vesper predicts profit wins within the month. I do not bet against her anymore. She has not been wrong yet about anything that actually mattered. 2 districts away, Cassian watches the same reports cross his father's desk and reads them very differently than I would like him to. He does not see growth to be respected. He sees a threat outrunning the House's ability to contain it through slow council process alone, and he is not shy about saying so. We cannot outweight him, Cassian tells Dorian, pressing harder than he has pressed on anything since the midpoint. Every week we deliberate, he claims another district. Concord already has the resources and the motive. Formalize it. A joint operation succeeds where a probationary license only delays the inevitable. He does not say the other half of it, the part that has been sitting under every argument he has made since the day his brother's hollow pulled him out of a killing blow in front of his own men. That watching me rise unbothers him more than any threat report ever could, and he would rather end it than keep watching. Dorian listens the way he always listens to his remaining son now. Patient on the surface, something colder running underneath it that Cassian has never quite learned to read correctly. He does not agree outright. He also does not refuse outright, which by this point in the story is starting to look less like caution and more like a man quietly running out of better options of his own. Cassian leaves the study that evening, believing he has made real progress, the blind confidence of a man who has spent his whole life reading his father's silences as invitations rather than warnings. For once, I am not there to watch that mistake happen in real time, though I suspect it will not stay a secret from me for long. Core breaks level 35 that same week, and it does not feel like the climb from 20 to 28 felt, a matter of efficient arrangement. This one arrives as something closer to a structural shift, the anchor ceiling itself widening rather than simply filling, room opening up that was not there an hour before. Vesper feels it too, somehow, through whatever the link actually is between us now. Something changed, she says, not a question. I tell her the ceiling moved, not just the count beneath it, and she considers that for a long moment before saying that a rising ceiling is a far better problem to have than the one Part 8 handed us. That night, for once, neither of us has anywhere urgent to be. We end up on the depot's original wall, the very first one the guard entry sealed shut on night 1, looking out over a skyline that used to be nothing but ruin and now carries actual working lights across 5 separate districts. We do not talk about anchor scaling, or task forces, or minor houses. She tells me, unprompted, about the Defense Corps posting she held before the hollowing, the squad she led, all of them gone now, and I do not offer comfort I do not actually have to give. I just listen, because that is apparently what she needs tonight, not solutions. I tell her, in return, about the version of me who kept a house's books balanced for people who never once thanked me for the work. A life that increasingly feels like it belonged to someone else entirely. She does not laugh at it the way I expect her to. She just looks at me for a long moment, quiet, and says that whoever threw that version of me away was an idiot and means it plainly. Neither of us says anything larger than that. It does not need to be larger than that. We sit there a while longer, shoulders almost touching, watching lights hold steady across a skyline that was dark and silent the very first night I stood in this exact spot, with nothing but a stolen hollow and no plan at all. At some point, her hand finds mine on the cold stone between us. Not a declaration of anything, just warmth against warmth, and neither of us comments on it or pulls away first. It is the first entirely unhurried moment either of us has had since a waterfall and a chained camp and a checkpoint full of teeth ago. I do not know what this is yet, exactly, between the two of us, and I get the distinct impression she does not either. And for once, neither of us seems to feel any particular urgency about naming it tonight. Some things, I am learning, get to simply exist for a while before they need a word attached to them. She is the one who breaks the quiet, eventually, sitting up straighter, eyes narrowing at something on the horizon I cannot see yet without her pointing it out to me directly. Convoy, she says. All business again in an instant. No running lights. Moving toward Draven's old sector. That is not a patrol pattern. That is a staging pattern. I do not get long to ask her what that means before Iris's radio crackles to life beside us. Breathless, the careful procedural calm entirely gone from her voice for the second time since I have known her. I got a draft I was never supposed to see, she says. It has a name on it. You need to hear this name right now. Operation Cinder, she reads, the paper audibly shaking in her hand even through the radio. Joint Command, Concord Courier Authority, and House Ashvale. I do not know the timeline yet. I do not know the target list yet. I know it exists, and I know somebody signed both names to the same order this week. Vesper is already on her feet beside me. The warmth of a moment ago gone in an instant, replaced by the same sharp focus that has kept both of us alive since the very first night. We knew this was coming, she says, quiet, steady, more to herself than to me. Knowing it is coming and watching it get a name are two very different weights to carry. I look out at the skyline one more time, the lights still holding steady across 5 districts that did not exist as anything but rubble at the start of all this. And I understand, sitting there in the sudden cold, that whatever peace tonight offered was always going to be borrowed against a bill that would eventually come due in full. Operation Cinder does not open with an assault on the depot. That surprises me for exactly as long as it takes Vesper to explain, flatly, why it should not surprise me at all. The depot is a fortress now, layered defense, cells on every wall. Nobody smart attacks a fortress head-on. They hit a way station instead, one of the mid-relay points on the eastern route, struck mid-transit while a supply run is exposed on open ground between 2 better-defended anchors. The exact seam Vesper's own doctrine identified as the ward's remaining weak point weeks ago. She flagged this exact gap in her own report 2 weeks back. And I remember, standing in the yard listening to the first frantic radio call, that we discussed reinforcing it and then let the discussion slide under the weight of everything else demanding attention that same week. That delay has a cost now, arriving all at once. Whoever planned Cinder studied us properly first. This is not a blunt house patrol riding out on wounded pride the way Cassian's Coal Squad did at the midpoint. This is patient, informed, aimed precisely at the one seam in a doctrine that has otherwise held for weeks without failing once. In the same hour, a different kind of attack lands, one no cell formation can intercept. A story starts moving through the commons markets, careful and specific in a way that reads like it was drafted by someone who understands exactly how rumor actually spreads in a frightened city. Hollow courier goods carry contamination, the story says, passed hand to hand faster than any of my couriers ever managed to move actual cargo. Spoiled grain, tainted water, the exact kind of fear that does not need to be true to work, only plausible enough that people stop buying before they stop to ask who benefits from the doubt. By mid-morning, 3 separate stalls in the commons market have quietly stopped stocking anything with the hollow courier mark on it. Not out of any official order, just ordinary shopkeepers deciding the risk of an angry customer outweighs the profit of a contract nobody can currently prove is safe. A woman I do not recognize stops one of my own couriers mid-delivery and asks, point blank, whether it is true that the grain carries something that makes children sick. My courier has no way to answer a question like that. It simply stands there, patient, wrong-looking in exactly the way that used to terrify this city, and now apparently terrifies it again, freshly, for a different reason. The third strike lands almost simultaneously, and this one goes for the part of the ward I least expect anyone to bother targeting directly. Someone gets into the greenhouse overnight and salts the newest garden bed with something that is not salt at all. Something that starts killing rows within hours of the first watering. Celine reaches me before I have finished processing all 3 reports at once, and for the first time since the Market Square reversal, she does not sound like an ally standing beside me. She sounds like a leader whose own people are currently screaming at her to choose them over me, loudly, in public, right now. My people want the contract cut, she says, flat, exhausted. Today, publicly. They are not wrong to be frightened, Kale. Frightened people do not wait for proof before they act on fear, and right now, all they have is a rumor and an empty stall where their vegetables used to be. I ask her if she believes the contamination story herself. She does not answer immediately, which unsettles me more than an honest no would have. I believe your grain, she says finally. I am less sure I believe I can hold my own people together long enough for the truth to actually catch up with the rumor. She tells me about the shouting match at the Commons Hall that morning. 3 of her own senior people demanding an immediate public break. One of them is the same older militiaman who spoke up for the alliance back at the Market Square reversal, now standing on the opposite side of that same argument out of pure fear for his own family's next meal. I do not ask her to fix that contradiction. I do not think it is fixable tonight, only survivable, and survivable is apparently the entire currency both of us have been trading in since long before either of us met the other for the first time at gunpoint, outside a depot neither of us trusted yet. Word reaches me next about the way station, and this time it is not an abstract number. Tamsin, one of the hired hands who has run that relay point since the 2nd week of the expansion, took a length of pipe across the ribs covering a retreat that let 2 younger workers escape the attack entirely unharmed. She is alive. She is not fine. The runner who brings the news does not soften it, and I do not ask him to, because I have learned by now that softened news only costs me time I do not have when the real shape of a problem eventually surfaces anyway, usually at the worst possible moment. Tamsin has run that relay since the 2nd week of the expansion, steady and unremarkable in the specific way the best workers usually are. The kind of person whose name I would not have known to say out loud 6 weeks ago, and now cannot stop repeating to myself while I decide where to send help first. 2 guard entries reach her before I do, Vesper's doctrine already routing a response cell to the wounded relay point without waiting for my order, and I feel a small, sharp relief at that, proof that the ward can hold itself together even in the exact minute its own founder is standing frozen, unable to be everywhere at once. I stand in the depot yard with 3 separate crises pulling in 3 separate directions, and understand, with a clarity that does not feel remotely like the confidence I have gotten used to since the midpoint, that I cannot personally fix all 3 of them tonight. I have to choose. I hate choosing. I go to the greenhouse, not because it matters more than the others, but because it is the one crisis where I actually know something useful. Some fragment of chemistry and diagnosis buried in me from before any of this that neither Vesper, nor Celine, nor Iris happens to carry. Vesper takes the way station herself, a full cell already moving under her direction before I finish deciding anything. Because apparently, she decided for both of us the instant the report came in, and simply let me catch up to the plan already in motion. Iris does not wait for instructions at all. She is already moving through Concord's own internal channels by the time I think to ask her to, working to trace the contamination story back to whoever actually planted it. Using access she is risking her entire remaining career to keep using on my behalf. Celine holds her own ground the hardest way there is, standing in front of her own frightened people and refusing to give them the easy answer they are demanding. We do not cut the contract on a rumor, she tells them, loud enough that I hear about it secondhand within the hour. We cut it on proof, if proof ever actually arrives, not before. The greenhouse is worse up close than the report suggested. Whole rows blackening from the root up, a smell under the dirt that does not belong there, sharp and chemical, in a way months of learning this world's plants the hard way has taught me to recognize as deliberate, not natural. I do not have proper equipment. I have what the Reach actually has. Ash, charcoal, clean water pulled fresh from the cistern 3 blocks over that a cracked water old man finally trusted us to fix 2 weeks ago, and a working theory about what kind of poison spreads exactly this way through soil this fast. I crouch over the worst of the rows and smell it properly for the first time. Sharp, faintly metallic, Nothing like the rot of ordinary spoilage. Something salted through deliberately, meant to leach slow and wide through root systems instead of killing fast and obviously enough to be caught the moment it went in. Whoever did this understood exactly how this greenhouse works, which rows feed the ward first, which section this bed's roots actually draw water from. That is not opportunistic vandalism. That is someone who studied our own applied progression layer as carefully as they studied Vesper's defense doctrine before choosing where to strike. It is not elegant. I mix what I have, the way I once watched my own instincts assemble a plan out of nothing and a dead end that first night. More conviction than certainty, and press it into the contaminated rows before whatever this is finishes killing everything the greenhouse has grown since part 4. It does not save everything. I know that before I even finish the first pass through the rows, watching some sections respond and others simply continue dying no matter what I press into the dirt around their roots. Roughly half the bed comes back. The other half does not, and nothing I try changes that fact tonight. I sit back on my heels in the ruined dirt afterward and let myself feel the specific, honest weight of a partial win instead of pretending it is a full one. Half a harvest saved is not nothing. It is also not the clean victory I would have promised myself at the start that hard work always eventually earns. Vesper's report reaches me near dawn, exhausted but intact. The way station held, barely, its outer wall cracked but standing, the attackers driven off before they could finish whatever the raid was actually meant to accomplish, beyond Tamsin's injury and a badly dented relay schedule. Iris's report is more frustrating than either. She traces the contamination story back through 2 layers of couriers before the trail goes cold at a name she cannot yet fully confirm. I cannot kill it tonight, she tells me. I can only slow it. It survives. It will keep circulating until somebody hands the commons real proof instead of just my word against a rumor. By morning, the 3 lines converge into something that is not victory and does not pretend to be. The greenhouse is half restored. The way station stands, wounded. The press story is delayed, not dead, still moving quietly through markets that have not yet decided whether to believe it or not. We are battered, I tell Vesper, standing in the gray early light over a ward that has taken its first real coordinated hit since the backlash. Stung, not broken. She agrees, quiet, and neither of us tries to dress the sentence up as anything larger or cleaner than exactly what it actually is tonight. Celine arrives not long after, tired in a way that has nothing to do with lack of sleep, and reports that the contract held barely on the strength of her own word alone, rather than any proof she could actually offer her people this morning. That is not a debt I can repay with gratitude, she tells me. You understand that. I spent something real to buy you this morning. I tell her I understand exactly what she spent, because I have been spending the same currency myself since a rainy gate months back, and there is no version of tonight where either of us walks away from it without owing the other something neither gold nor grain can properly settle. Iris finds me again that afternoon, with one more piece of the puzzle finally confirmed, and this one lands harder than the rest combined. The sabotage order, she says, carries an authorization signature. Not House Command in general. Cassian Asheville, personally, direct and unambiguous. No plausible deniability left standing anywhere in the paperwork. Not soldiers against soldiers this time. Poison in a garden bed that fed civilians. A rumor built to starve trust out of frightened people who never asked to be part of anyone's war. Cassian crossed a line tonight that even his own account of the midpoint battle never quite crossed, and I do not think he crossed it by accident. 2 districts away, Dorian receives the same confirmation through his own channels within the day, and for the first time since I have been watching him from a distance through Vesper's descriptions and my own 2 visits to that hall, I hear that his reaction is not composure. It is doubt, visible, unmistakable, aimed for once directly at his own remaining son. He summons Cassian to the same study where the boy pressed his case for a joint task force only days ago, and this time does not offer the patient, ambiguous silence Cassian has learned to read as tacit approval. Civilians, Dorian says, according to the account that reaches Iris through channels she will not fully name even to me. You authorized an attack on a garden bed that feeds children. Cassian's answer, whatever it actually is, does not satisfy his father the way his account of the midpoint battle once did. For the first time in this entire story, the version of events Cassian offers does not simply get filed away for later. It gets questioned, out loud, by the one man whose good opinion he has spent his whole life chasing. Scouts spot the apex 2 days after the greenhouse attack, deep in the old city core. a section of meridian nobody has mapped properly since the hollowing started, and something in me decides almost immediately that I want it, deliberately, not on impulse. The ward needs the numbers. Part 12 cost us real ground, real trust, real food, and an Apex class bind is exactly the kind of leap that could close that gap in a single night instead of the slow, grinding weeks it would otherwise take to rebuild everything cinder damaged. Iris hears the plan before I finish outlining it and goes very still over her own notes. The particular stillness she gets when something in front of her connects to something she was not looking for. That zone, she says slowly. It borders a reference in the old Asheville cover files. I never confirmed what it actually points to. I ask her what kind of reference. She does not have a clean answer, only a designation, a location logged in a redacted house document she has held for weeks without fully understanding its significance, filed under a case name that has nothing to do with an Apex, or with me at all, as far as she can tell. We go anyway, because an Apex worth this much is not a lead I can afford to ignore, and because some quiet part of me has wanted an excuse to walk directly into whatever the house has spent all this time refusing to explain about the ceremony that started all of this. Vesper asked me once, plainly, whether I want to know what is buried in that zone, or whether I have simply decided the Apex gives me an excuse to look without having to admit that is what I am doing. I do not have a clean answer for her. I go anyway. She comes with me anyway. Neither of us pretends the two reasons are fully separate. I tell Celine where we are headed before we leave, because I have learned, slowly, that disappearing without a word is the one habit from my old life at the house that I refuse to carry forward into this one. She does not try to talk me out of it. She only tells me to come back, which from her counts as something close to a blessing. Vesper scouts the approach personally, 3 cells trailing at a careful distance behind her, and the city core lives up to its reputation within the first quarter hour. Something massive moves parallel to us through collapsed towers, patient, unhurried, clearly aware of exactly how exposed we currently are. I catch flashes of it between broken walls, scale and shoulder, and a slow, deliberate gait that reads nothing like the frantic ferals we usually deal with. Apex, Vesper confirms through the link. Unnecessary, but grounding to hear said out loud. Do not engage until we are ready to. It is patient. Match it. It very nearly catches a scout entry crossing an open plaza, a near miss that costs us nothing but 2 years off whatever remains of my nerves, and Vesper reroutes the whole approach around a collapsed rail tunnel rather than risk the plaza's open ground a second time before we even reach our actual target. The tunnel is worse in its own way, close and dark, and full of the specific quiet that means something used to live down here and is not fully finished dying. I keep one hand on the wall the entire crossing, counting exits out of old habit, the same habit that has kept me alive since a rainy night with no plan at all. Vesper does not speak during the crossing, all her attention routed through 3 scout entries at once, and I watch her work with something close to awe even now, this many weeks in. The specific competence of a woman who has turned surviving this city into something approaching an art form. We find the Apex first, coiled at the base of what used to be a records tower, and behind it, sealed into the tower's collapsed lower floor, a vault door bearing the Asheville crest, dust-caked, clearly untouched since long before the hollowing ever reached this district at all. Iris's hands are not steady, prying the seal loose, and I understand why the moment the door gives and the first shelf of records catches the light. House archive. Personal correspondence, ceremony logs going back generations, the specific bureaucratic paper trail every noble house apparently keeps buried somewhere nobody is meant to find it. I find the file with my own name on it faster than I expect to, sitting near the top of a stack that looks recently disturbed, as if someone visited this vault more recently than the dust on everything else around it would otherwise suggest. My hands are not steady either, opening it. Awakening result, the record reads, in a hand too careful to be anything but official. Not null. The true entry, the one buried under a falsified notation, added in a second, different hand, reads 2 words I have never once heard spoken aloud in my entire life. Necrotic Dominion. Iris reads over my shoulder and goes pale in a way I have not seen from her since the checkpoint attack. That is not a common bloodline talent, she says, quiet. That is a forbidden one, sealed out of most house records generations ago. Whoever falsified this did not make a mistake. They buried something real on purpose. She pulls a second document from the same shelf, older, cross-referenced against my name by a clerk's careful hand decades before I was even born, cataloging the last 3 Asheville bloodline holders of the same talent and the quiet, unglamorous ends each of them apparently met not long after their gift was properly recorded. 3 of them, across 4 generations, each one entered in the record and then quietly gone inside a single season. One drowned in calm water, One took a fever nobody else in a full household ever caught. The third simply stops appearing in the accounts at all, 1 year present and the next year absent, as though a pen had been drawn cleanly through him somewhere between two columns nobody was ever meant to read side by side. I noticed the pattern before Iris has to point at it. A bloodline this house buried did not stay buried by accident, and it did not bury itself. Someone spent 4 generations making certain this gift never lived long enough to become a problem worth naming. I do not know yet what to do with that particular detail. I file it, the way I file everything now, in the same growing pile of things this family apparently decided I was better off never learning at all, and turn back to the more immediate document still sitting open in my hands. The next page answers the question neither of us has said out loud yet. Authorization for the false verdict, the ceremony's altered result, the quiet exile that followed it. One signature, clear, unambiguous, dated the same week as the ceremony itself. Lady Mirren Ashvale. I read it 3 times, the way I once read entry 1 3 times, in a dead end that feels like it belongs to a different lifetime now. It does not change on the 4th read either. My stepmother did not simply fail to stop my exile. She designed it, deliberately, to protect Keishin's uncontested claim to everything I was never supposed to threaten. There's a second page beneath the authorization, a shorter note in the same careful hand, addressed to nobody, the kind of thing a person writes only for themselves. It does not ask forgiveness. It simply states, plainly, that a house with 2 true bloodline heirs is a house that eventually tears itself apart from the inside, and that one clean cut now was kinder than the war later. Kinder. I read that word twice, out loud this time, tasting how obscene it sounds attached to a glyph that read null in front of an entire hall, to a crest torn off my coat in the rain, to a whole season of a city trying to kill me, while the woman who engineered all of it sat safely behind house walls calling it mercy. Something in my chest goes very quiet, quieter than the cold that settled there the night I watched Draven kill a boy I knew. This is not chaos. This is not a stranger's cruelty. This is a woman I sat across from at house dinners for years, who forged a lie specific enough to end a life she apparently decided was inconvenient to keep around. Vesper does not say anything comforting. She simply stands beside me, close, silent, letting the weight of it exist in the room without trying to talk me out of feeling it fully first. I do not cry. I do not rage either. I just stand there, holding a piece of paper that rewrote my whole exile backward in under a minute. The Apex does not care about any of that. It chooses that exact moment to remember we are standing in its territory, and the vault's collapsing outer wall gives it a straight line at all 3 of us, before Vesper's warning even finishes crossing the link between us properly. There's no time to grieve properly. There is barely time to move. I feel something ugly and useful click into place behind the grief. The same cold clarity that carried me through the night Finn died, and I let it carry me now, because Meridian has never once waited politely for anyone's feelings to finish landing. Every cell we brought engages at once, guard walls locking, fighters flanking through the tower's broken framework, Vesper directing all 3 formations through command link, with a precision that has nothing left in it of the woman who just watched me read that letter 30 seconds ago. The fight is not clean. The Apex outranks everything in our current roster by a wide margin, and I feel the strain of the whole network through the link at once, every entry giving more than it should safely be able to give, the way an entire orchestra strains together toward one final, unified note. Guard cells anchor the collapsed tower's remaining doorways, buying seconds at a time against something that swats through reinforced concrete like it is wet paper. Fighter cells flank through gaps that close again almost as fast as they open, and Vesper calls each shift a half second before I would have thought to call it myself. I take a hit early, glancing, enough to put me on the ground once and remind me that whatever this creature is, it is not once treated tonight as a serious threat until the moment it finally starts to. I get back up because staying down was never actually a decision I know how to make anymore. Not after everything these last months have cost to keep me standing. I close the distance myself when the opening finally comes, hand closing on something ancient and enormous and furiously alive, and the toll hits instantly. Harder than the name bind on Vesper ever cost me. Harder than anything the ledger has ever demanded from me in one single payment. It takes everything. Every reserve, every scrap of anchor capacity built up since the backlash taught us to respect the limit properly. And for one terrifying second, I do not know if the bind will complete before the cost simply empties me out entirely, standing there, alone, with nothing left to hold it with. It completes. Second SSS entry, and core does not simply climb, it detonates upward. 35 the past 45 in one single unbroken surge that drops me to one knee in the vault's ruined doorway, breathing like I have run every mile of the last several months at once. Vesper catches my arm before I fully go down, and for a long moment, neither of us says anything at all. The grief and the victory and the sheer physical cost of tonight all arriving at once, with nowhere left in either of us to properly sort them into separate piles. By the next morning, the new Apex's output alone closes most of what Cinder cost us 2 nights ago. The greenhouse's lost half regrows under labor the Apex alone can provide overnight. The cracked way station wall gets rebuilt before the next scheduled caravan even arrives to test it. Vesper reads the comparison out loud once, flat, the way she always delivers the numbers that actually matter. Whatever Cassian's people took from us, she says, we just took back in a single night, and then some. I do not feel triumphant hearing it. I feel tired, and something colder underneath the tired that has not gone away yet. Tamsin, still healing but steady on her feet again, is the one who tells me the way station wall finished ahead of schedule, and she says it the same plain way Harlan once handed back a page of honest numbers at the gate. Proof over praise. Exactly the currency this city has taught all of us to trust over anything softer. I do not ride for the Ashvale estate. I want to. Some furious, wounded part of me wants nothing more than to put that letter directly in front of Lord Dorian and watch whatever composure he has left finally break for good, tonight, immediately, before the anger has time to cool into something more useful. I do not do that. Instead, I hand the letter to Iris and ask her to certify it properly, copy it through whatever Concord channel will hold up as legitimate later, and keep it somewhere neither Cassian nor Mirren nor anyone else can quietly make it disappear before I decide the right moment to use it. A weapon fired too early is just noise, I tell her, and she looks at me for a long moment like she is recalculating something about me all over again, the same way she did the night I counted a dead entry by number instead of walking away from the loss. She takes the letter without arguing. I do not tell her that some part of me wants to ride straight to that estate tonight and put the letter directly in Dorian's hands myself, watch it happen, be there for whatever his face does when he finally understands what his own wife did to his own son. I do not need to tell her. I suspect she already knows exactly how much this restraint is costing me to hold. Vesper says nothing about the decision either, though she watches me make it with an expression I cannot fully read. Somewhere between approval and something gentler that neither of us has found the right moment to properly name yet. When this is done properly, she says finally, it will matter more than it would tonight. I tell her I am counting on that being true. We are still standing at the vault's ruined entrance, Iris carefully sealing the copied pages, when Vesper goes still beside me, eyes fixed on the tree line above the collapsed plaza we crossed hours ago. I follow her gaze and see it before she says a single word out loud. House Ashvale banners, moving fast, closing in. Lord Dorian has come himself. Dorian does not come to the vault to fight. He comes with an honor guard, not a strike force, and stops well short of the ruined entrance, close enough to speak plainly, far enough that neither side has to pretend this is anything but what it actually is. A choice, offered once. Return to House Ashvale control, he says. No preamble. The same flat delivery he used the night he tore the crest off my coat. Quietly, tonight, the ledger, the ward, all of it, folded back under house oversight, and this entire matter ends without further bloodshed on either side. Or, he continues, when I do not answer immediately, House Ashvale formally declares you and everything you have built a threat to the region, and I will not be able to protect what happens after that declaration, even if I wanted to. I do not ask him whether he wants to. I already know the answer sits somewhere he is not ready to say out loud yet. I have the letter in my coat. I could end this entire conversation right now, hand him proof his own wife forged the verdict that started all of this. And I do not, because a weapon fired in anger in a ruined plaza is not the same weapon fired at the right moment in front of the right witnesses. No, I tell him instead. Just that. One word, plain, no speech behind it. It is the same word he once used on me, standing in the same family, and I let him hear exactly how small it sounds coming back the other direction for once. Dorian's face does not change, not visibly, but I watch something settle behind his eyes that might be disappointment or might be something closer to relief, as if some part of him hoped I would say exactly that and free him from having to decide anything himself tonight. Vesper stands close enough at my shoulder that I feel her tense at the word, ready for the honor guard to move, and they do not. Nobody draws a weapon. Dorian simply absorbs the refusal the way he absorbs everything now. Filed, weighed, not yet acted upon, a man clearly more comfortable with silence than with any of the choices available to him tonight. Cassian, arriving late with a second column of house soldiers, does not share his father's restraint. This is exactly the arrogance that got civilians hurt at that greenhouse, he says, loud, to the assembled guard, conveniently forgetting whose hand actually authorized that particular attack in the first place. End it now, tonight. Dorian does not answer him immediately, and I recognize the specific quality of that silence now. The same one that used to terrify Cassian into thinking he had won. This time it does not read like agreement. It reads like a man standing at the edge of a decision he is no longer certain he wants to make. He turns without giving Cassian the order and rides back toward the estate with his honor guard, leaving the threat exactly where he found it, unresolved, hanging over both of us like weather that is not decided yet whether it intends to break. Cassian lingers a moment longer, staring at me across the ruined plaza with an expression I cannot fully place. Something between old contempt and a newer, more uncomfortable question he does not yet have words for. Then he turns and follows his father's column without another word. We ride back to the Reach in near silence, Vesper watching the tree line the whole way, and I spend most of it turning the letter over in my coat pocket, weighing exactly how many more nights I actually have before someone else decides the timing for me instead. It breaks 2 nights later. The Joint Task Force deploys at full strength around the ward's perimeter, and Vesper's scouts bring back numbers that put a cold weight in my chest, even after everything these last months have taught me about standing steady under bad news. 3 columns, House and Conquered intermixed, more soldiers in one place than I have ever personally seen assembled, easily double what our current cell network can comfortably hold against an open engagement. I make myself read the tally twice instead of flinching from it, the same discipline I taught myself over a stolen ledger on the first night. A number I refuse to look at is a number already deciding the fight for me, and I am done letting anyone else do my counting. Hard, Vesper says, reading the same numbers I am reading, not hopeless. Cell efficiency buys us more than raw count would suggest, but hard. She walks me through the actual comparison anyway, because I have learned by now that she never delivers a hard number without also delivering the reason it is survivable. Raw count favors them 2-to-1. Effective patent output, once cell efficiency is factored against their unmixed formations, closes that gap to something closer to even, maybe even slightly in our favor on defensible ground. That is still not a number I would have chosen to fight on if anyone had asked me first, I tell her. Nobody asked either of us, she says. That is mostly how every important night in this story has gone so far. I decide she is not wrong, and that arguing with the pattern at this point would be its own kind of denial. Celine commits Commons militia to the wall that same evening, openly, publicly, without hedging the decision behind any more provisional language. This is not a contract anymore, she tells her assembled people, loud enough for the whole yard to hear it clearly. This is our fight too. It always was. We just took longer than we should have to say so honestly. Iris makes her own choice within the hour, and hers costs her everything she has left to lose. She transmits the task force's full attack plan to Vesper's radio, in plain, unencrypted signal, burning whatever cover she has maintained inside Concord since the checkpoint all those weeks ago, in one single deliberate act. I am done pretending I still work for them, she tells me, when I ask if she understands what she has just done to herself. I stopped working for them the night you counted a dead entry by number. Tonight, I just finally stopped hiding it. She does not sound frightened saying it. She sounds relieved. There is no path back for her after tonight, and we both know it without saying it out loud. No quiet resignation, no graceful transfer to a desk posting somewhere safer. She is just handed an active military operations attack plan to the exact target it was built against, in her own recorded voice, on an open channel. I ask her if it was worth it, mostly because I need to hear her say yes out loud, for my own sake as much as hers. She looks at me like the question barely deserves an answer. Ask me again after we survive tonight, she says. I already know what I am going to say. I would just rather say it to you alive. Draven finds us at the gate that same night, thinner still, and tells us, flat, that Concord approached him that afternoon with a formal pardon, full and clean, in exchange for intelligence on our defenses and a public statement condemning me by name in front of the assembled task force. I said no, he says, before I can ask. I have thought about that market square a great deal since it happened. About what my own creature almost did to people who never once threatened either of us. I am not interested in helping whoever engineered that outcome a second time, whatever they are currently offering to pay me for it. He does not stay to be thanked. He leaves us with 3 pages of hand-drawn notes on the task force's staging positions, information his brief time inside their offer clearly let him gather, and disappears back into the dark before Vesper can even finish deciding whether to trust the gift. Vesper studies his handwriting for a long moment after he is gone, comparing it against something in her own memory. Same hand that used to write feed schedules for Chained Hollow, she says, quiet. people change what they build. Handwriting apparently stays exactly the same. I decide that is as close to a compliment as either of us is likely to get out of her about him tonight. Vesper spends the remaining hours before nightfall laying out the full cell defense across every quadrant of the ward. Guard cells anchoring the outer wall, fighter cells held in reserve for exactly the kind of breach her doctrine was built to answer. Scout and courier cells running constant relay between every position at once. Every entry has a role tonight. Nothing sits idle. Nothing gets held back out of caution the way it might have during the backlash. And watching her lay the whole defense out on the map, I understand that this is the plan she has been quietly building since the night she nearly died, proving the old one was not good enough. She sets herself at the center of it. The circuit breaker she designed weeks ago finally getting tested for real, and does not once ask me whether she should take that post instead of somewhere safer. I do not offer to move her either. We have both learned, the hard way, exactly how little good it does either of us to pretend otherwise. I find Iris before the first columns start moving, and hand her the certified archive copies directly, sealed, complete, the single most dangerous piece of paper either of us currently possesses. If I fall tonight, I tell her, publish it. Every copy, every channel you still have access to. Do not wait for a better moment. There may not be one. She takes it without argument, the way she took the original in the vault, and for a moment, neither of us says anything else. Because there is nothing else that actually needs saying between two people who have already proven, several times over now, exactly how far they are willing to go for each other's side of this fight. The first skirmishes hit the perimeter as full dark settles over the ward, probing attacks along the eastern relay line, testing our response times like a careful enemy tests a wall before committing the full weight of an assault against it. This is not the battle. This is the battle, finding out where we are weakest before it decides where to actually strike. I stand on the depot's original wall, the same one Vesper and I sat on quietly not so many nights ago, and watched torchlight spreading slowly across the tree line in numbers I still cannot fully make myself believe are real. Hard, not hopeless. I repeat Vesper's own words back to myself and try to make them feel as true as she made them sound. Celine's militia hold the southern line beside a guard cell, human shoulders and gray ones locked into the same defensive rhythm without a flicker of hesitation between them. And I think, watching it, of the first morning she raised a rifle at my chest and promised to burn this whole yard down by nightfall if I gave her a single reason to. Iris moves between relay points with a radio in each hand, feeding Vesper's cells live positioning off whatever fragments of the task force's own communications she can still intercept, burned cover or not. And I catch myself thinking that whatever Concord loses tonight, it is losing the best inspector it never deserved to keep. Then, through the smoke and torchlight moving along the enemy's rear formation, I see her, not Cassian, not Dorian. A smaller figure, deliberately unremarkable, moving with an escort too careful to be anyone unimportant. And I recognize the posture before I ever see the face clearly enough to be certain. Lady Mirren Ashvale is on the battlefield herself, tonight, in person, close enough that the distance between us has finally, after all these months in the entire length of this story, narrowed down to something I could actually cross before this night is over. The full assault comes at once, not in careful stages, the joint task force throwing its actual weight against the perimeter the moment the probing skirmishes finish confirming where our lines actually sit. Torchlight becomes a wall of it, moving fast across ground I've spent weeks learning to defend. Vesper's cell defense holds longer than it has any right to. I feel it through the link, every ring absorbing pressure exactly the way her doctrine promised. Guard walls buckling and resetting, fighters closing gaps a half second before they become fatal. The whole network straining but not breaking. Not yet. I do not know how long Dorian's officers calculated we would last. I know, from the confusion audible even across the distance separating us, that we have already outlasted whatever number they wrote down in whatever planning room built tonight's assault. That alone is not victory. It is only proof this fight was never as one-sided as it looked on paper. Vesper's circuit breaker takes its first real load somewhere in the second hour, a cascading strain from 3 overworked cells routed through her deliberately, instead of letting it spread unchecked, and I feel the cost of it hit her through the link, sharp and immediate, though her voice on the radio never once wavers. I ask if she needs relief. No, she says, flat, already routing the next surge before I finish the question. This is exactly what I built it for. Let me actually use it. A guard cell near the eastern wall takes the worst of the first real push. 3 gray shoulders locked together against a breach that should have opened clean, and instead simply does not, minute after minute, past whatever point their attackers clearly expected the line to finally give. Celine's militia hold beside them without flinching. and I catch sight of her once through the smoke, directing her own people with the exact same steady voice she used the morning she nearly burned this whole yard down on principle. Except now that voice is keeping people alive on my side of a line, instead of threatening to end me on the other side of it. Cassian finds his own opening somewhere in the chaos, and I understand exactly what drives him into it the moment Vesper flags his position, pushing deep past our outer ring, alone, unsupported, chasing something that has nothing to do with tactics and everything to do with the midpoint battle he has never fully recovered from. He wants it back. Whatever the Alpha took from him in front of his own soldiers weeks ago, some private reckoning he has been carrying since that night, and pride has walked him directly into the one part of the ward where nobody from his own column can reach him in time if something goes wrong. I reach him first. The apex is at my back, and for one long, ugly second, standing over my half-brother with every advantage in the world sitting in my hands, I let myself actually consider it. He tore my crest apart with his laugh before Dorian ever touched the fabric. He would have let the Concord Raider finish the job at the midpoint if I had not moved first. I have every reason to let this be the night I stop paying for a debt that was never mine to owe. I stand there long enough to feel the full weight of that thought pass through me completely, and then I put it down, deliberately, the same way I put down the letter in the vault instead of writing straight for the estate with it. It would be easy. That is the part that frightens me most about the pause. Standing there with the Apex's patience at my back, and Cassian pinned and breathing hard on the ground in front of me. Nobody would call it murder. Nobody would even call it a choice. They would call it a battle, and battles have casualties, and nobody keeps count of exactly which second a man decided not to move fast enough to save his own enemy. I think, for one full breath, of Finn, of the 2 chain-scarred entries I destroyed with my own hands, of every cost this ledger has ever demanded from me honestly. Letting Cassian die here would not be honest. It would be convenient, and I have learned, the hard way, exactly how much I have come to distrust anything in this story that arrives that easily. I pull him clear instead, in full view of both armies. The exact same motion the Alpha made for him once already, except this time, it is my own hands doing it, not a creature acting on instinct. He stares at me, breathing hard, and I do not wait for him to find words. I use the moment while it is still mine to use. Both armies are close enough now to have watched every second of it happen in plain sight. Iris's voice cuts across every Concord radio on the field in the same breath, patched into the emergency channel through access she has been quietly building since the checkpoint, and the certified record she has carried since the vault plays out loud, unedited, over every officer's frequency at once. Awakening result. Necrotic Dominion, the recording states, plain and unhurried in the same careful clerk's hand that first wrote it. Falsified by order. Authorized by Lady Mirren Ashvale. The static hisses once, then clears, and the field itself seems to go quieter for exactly as long as it takes the words to finish landing. I watch it hit officer after officer across both lines, radios lowering, faces turning toward the small figure I marked near the rear formation an hour ago. And I understand, watching the ripple spread from soldier to soldier, that Iris just did in 30 seconds what I could not have managed with an entire night of fighting. Dorian's own radio carries the same recording, and I see him go still from across the field, the particular stillness I have learned to read on him now. Not composure this time, but something closer to a foundation cracking somewhere it has never cracked before in his entire adult life. He crosses the ground between the 2 lines himself, slow, deliberate, ignoring his own officer's attempts to hold him back from open ground, and stops in front of his wife, close enough that I can hear every word, even from where I am still standing with Cassian half upright beside me. "Is it true?" he asks her. And it is not a question so much as a formality. The sound of a man giving her exactly one chance to make it not true before he decides what he already knows he is going to do next. Mirren does not answer immediately. Her silence is its own confession, and everyone on that field hears it exactly that way. She does not offer him an excuse. I watch her open her mouth once, close it again, and I understand, watching that there is no version of this speech that survives contact with an entire field of witnesses who just heard her own signature read out loud in her own husband's voice. Dorian does not shout. He turns from her entirely, to his assembled officers, to the Concord command present, to every house banner still standing on that field, and speaks the way he spoke the night he tore a crest off my coat, flat, final. A verdict rather than an argument. "The record is authentic," he says. "My wife falsified my son's awakening and orchestrated his exile to protect an inheritance that was never legally contested to begin with. Whatever authority stands behind tonight's operation rested on a lie she manufactured. That authority is void, effective immediately. He does not raise his voice to say it. He has never once needed to raise his voice to be heard clearly. Not on the night he tore a crest off my coat, not now. Standing in the exact same posture in a much larger, much colder room built out of open sky and torchlight instead of house stone. I watch something in him that has held rigid for months finally let go. Not into grief, not yet, but into the specific plainness of a man who has just spent a great deal of effort refusing to see something he can no longer avoid seeing. Whatever this costs him privately, he does not let it slow the sentence down at all. Mirren does not get a rescuing line. Nobody offers her one. The officers nearest her step back, not dramatically, just enough distance to make the shift in her standing physically visible, and she stands alone in that gap, exposed by fact rather than by anyone's cruelty, exactly as cold as the truth itself. I watch her eyes find mine once across the distance, the same fear I caught in the council hall weeks ago, except there is nothing left underneath it now for either of us to wonder about. She does not ask for forgiveness. She does not offer an explanation beyond the one already sitting in her own handwriting, calling my exile kinder than a war that never actually had to happen at all. I do not go to her. I do not have anything left to say to a woman who already wrote her own defense once and decided, on her own, that it was not worth offering to anyone but herself. Whatever happens to her now belongs to the house, not to me. And for the first time since the vault, I feel that distinction settle into something like peace instead of unfinished anger. The task force's commanding officer, a woman I have never met and will likely never learn the name of, lowers her own weapon first, then gives the order that ends the assault without another blow struck. She does it without looking at Dorian for permission, and I understand what that costs an officer to do in front of two commands. An order built on a lie is still an order, right up until someone with rank decides she would rather answer for stopping than for finishing. The operation's legal basis dissolves the moment the forgery becomes undeniable fact in front of witnesses who cannot unhear it. Cassian is still beside me, upright now, staring at the wreckage of everything his mother built to protect him. He does not say anything for a long moment. When he finally does, it is not an apology, not a speech, just my name, spoken plainly, without the old contempt that has colored every version of it since the ceremony. Kale, he says. Just that. It cost him more than I expected to, watching his face while he says it, and I do not make him say anything more than that single word. Some debts get settled in a syllable. I have learned that lesson from harder places than this one tonight. Dorian turns to me next, and the whole field seems to hold its breath, waiting to see what a man does when the verdict he delivered months ago turns out to have been built on a lie he never questioned closely enough to catch in time to stop it from costing his son everything. The exile is void, he says, loud enough for every house banner and every Concord officer still standing on that field to hear it clearly. Kaelin Ashvale's awakening result was never null. It was necrotic dominion, a true bloodline talent, mislabeled by forgery and hidden from this house all this time by my own wife's hand. Nobody cheers for a house verdict. That is not what happens next, and I understand, standing there in the settling quiet, exactly why. The crowd that reacts is not the house's crowd. It is the wards, the Commons militia still holding the southern line, Celine's people, Tamsin, Harlan, faces I know and faces I have never learned the names of yet. Celine finds my eyes across the distance and does not smile exactly, but something in her posture eases the way it eased that first morning at the depot gate, when a delivery finally proved I meant what I said. She raised a rifle at me once. Tonight, she is standing on my side of a battlefield instead, and neither of us needs to say out loud what that particular distance actually measures. They do not chant for Lord Ashvale's son. They chant for the warden, the name a market square gave me weeks before any house verdict decided to catch up with what the city had already worked out on its own. And the sound of it rolling across a battlefield that almost killed all of us tonight is louder than anything Dorian's formal declaration ever could have managed alone. I find Harlan near the edge of the militia line, weathered face unreadable in the torchlight, and he says nothing to me directly, only nods once. The same economical gesture he used the morning he handed back a page of honest way station numbers and told me not to ever let my own system start lying to me. I have not. I do not intend to start tonight. Milo is there too, further back where Celine clearly ordered the youngest couriers to stay, craning to see over the shoulders of adults twice his height, and when he finally catches my eye, he does not cheer or shout my name the way some of the others do. He just grins. The same unguarded grin from the relay board, like the outcome was never in doubt as far as he was concerned. Vesper reads the full comparison off later that night, once the field has finally gone quiet enough for numbers to matter again. Core, 1 to pass 45. Ledger, 0 to hundreds of ranked entries. Territory, a locked square of dirt to a ward larger than 3 old houses combined. Roots, 1 desperate walk to a network spanning half the district. She does not dress any of it up as triumph. She reads it the way she reads everything that matters. Flat. Exact. Letting the distance between the first number and the last one carry whatever weight it needs to carry on its own without her help. I find her afterward on the same wall where we sat quiet not so many nights ago. And this time, neither of us says anything about numbers, or anchor scaling, or task forces at all. She simply stands beside me, equal, unhurried, exactly where she has apparently decided she belongs, and I do not ask her to explain that decision. I already understand it. Iris finds us there, as the last of the tension finally drains out of the night, still holding the sealed archive pages, and stops halfway through returning them to me, frowning at something pressed into the leather beneath the house crest itself. A second seal, older, half-worn, unfamiliar in a way the Ashvale crest never once was. "This is not House Ashvale's mark," she says slowly, tracing the worn edges of it. "This is older. Whatever stood behind the cover-up that buried your bloodline in the first place, it was not just your stepmother protecting Cassian's inheritance. Someone above the house sealed this generations before either of them were ever born. None of us have an answer for that tonight, and for once, I let the question sit unresolved instead of chasing it immediately. Because some fights, I am finally learning, get to wait until morning. The formal recognition arrives 3 weeks later, sealed and signed by a city council that spent months pretending Meridian's ruins did not have a functioning government worth the name. The Hollow Reach is registered as a full ward, under my name, not House Ashvale's. Nobody at that hearing argues the point twice. I do not attend the ceremony myself. Vesper goes in my place, because I have learned by now that some victories mean more delivered by the person who actually built them alongside me than by the man whose name happens to sit on the paperwork at the top. She comes back afterward with the sealed charter under one arm and a look on her face I have not seen from her before. Something almost shy underneath the usual dry composure, and tells me the council chamber went quiet for a long moment before anyone remembered to actually stamp the document properly. They kept asking who the warden actually was, she says. I told them exactly what I have been telling everyone since the first night. A man who paid for every single thing he built, in full, without once pretending the cost was smaller than it actually was. Milo runs a full squad of junior couriers these days. Younger kids who look at him the way he once looked at the older courier who taught him the relay board. And he trains them the exact same way. Sharp-tongued, patient underneath it, correcting mistakes before they become habits. I asked him once if he remembered the fever, the medicine crossing the infected quarter, the night his name first meant something to me. He said he mostly remembers the argument he was having when I finally showed up, which sounds about right for the kid who has never once let a crisis interrupt a good argument. Harlan oversees the joint storehouses now, human ledgers and farmer hollow labor running the same rotation without anyone needing to explain the arrangement twice to a new arrival. He still does not call it trust, exactly, when I ask him. He calls it a number that has never once lied to him, which, by his own standard, is worth more than trust ever was. Draven works the Western Relay under the same license code every other Hollow Courier crew answers to now. Force bind method fully retired, his remaining entries reassigned properly, recovery times honored instead of ignored. He does not talk about the market square or the boy he nearly killed 2 sectors east. He does not need to. The work speaks plainly enough on its own. Cassian carries no title worth the name anymore. Stripped of Golden Sun status the same week Mirren's case reached formal house review, and spends most of his days now doing the unglamorous labor of repairing exactly what she broke. One damaged tenant relationship and one falsified record at a time. I do not forgive him fully. I do not think either of us actually wants that yet, or maybe ever. But he says my name plainly now, every time, no old contempt hiding under it. And some debts, I have learned, get settled slowly, in small, honest installments, rather than all at once in a single dramatic scene. He asked me once, awkwardly, standing in a doorway neither of us fully wanted to be sharing, whether there was ever going to be a version of this where we actually spoke like brothers again, instead of like 2 men managing an old wound carefully. I told him I did not know yet. He said that was a fairer answer than he expected, and left it there. Celine and I signed the formal Commons Ward merger on a morning bright enough that it almost feels wrong for a city this scarred. Her name beside mine on paper that makes the arrangement permanent instead of provisional, for the first time since a rifle pointed at my chest outside a depot neither of us trusted yet. Co-administrator, the document reads, and she signs it without ceremony, the same practical economy she brings to everything else. We built this together, she tells me afterward. The paper is just finally catching up to what has been true for weeks. I do not argue with her. She has not been wrong about much of anything since that first morning. Her militia has its own official standing within the ward's defense now too, folded into Vesper's cell doctrine as a permanent human wing rather than an outside ally on loan. The two of them argue over training schedules, with the comfortable friction of two competent people who long since stopped needing to prove anything to each other. Vesper and I do not sign anything. There is no document for what we are, and I have stopped feeling like we need one. She stands at every council session now as the ward's second voice. Not my subordinate, not my shadow. An equal whose word carries exactly as much weight as mine in every room that matters. I ask her once, quietly, on the wall we keep returning to, whether that arrangement suits her. She looks at me like the question is slightly beneath both of us at this point. I built half of what this place is with my own hands, she says. I was never going to settle for standing behind you once it was finished. The final tally gets read out at the same council session that grants formal recognition, and I let myself actually sit with the numbers this time instead of rushing past them toward the next crisis. Core, level 1 to pass 45. Ledger, 0 to hundreds of ranked entries across every class this system offers. Territory, a single locked depot door to a ward larger than 3 old houses combined. Roots, one desperate walk through infected streets to a network spanning half the district. Gold, nothing at all, to a treasury that no longer measures its own reserves in days of fear. Iris submits her formal resignation from Concord the same week, effective immediately, no negotiation, no severance, nothing owed to an office she stopped actually serving. Somewhere around the night she counted a dead entry alongside me at a checkpoint weeks ago. She takes the post of ward archivist instead, official, permanent, her name on the door. I ask her if she misses any part of the old badge. She considers the question longer than I expect. I miss the certainty, she admits, knowing exactly which side of a line I stood on. I do not miss much else. This side of the line turned out to actually mean something, once I stopped pretending otherwise. I end most evenings the same way now, alone on the depot's original wall for a few minutes before the rest of the ward's business pulls me back in, looking out over lights that hold steady across a skyline that used to be nothing but rubble and a single stubborn door. Someone in the market has started stamping trade goods with a small mark, unofficial, unauthorized, entirely too popular to stop even if I wanted to. 2 cross lines through the word Knoll, and beneath it, small, the word Warden. I do not know who started it. I have stopped trying to find out. It is, I decide, watching the lights hold steady one more night, the single best use of an insult I have ever personally witnessed. 0 talent, stamped proudly on every crate this ward ships out across half a district that once would not have sold me a sack of grain without a house name attached to the order first. Vesper finds me there, as she usually does, and does not ask what I am thinking about. She already knows. She sits beside me instead, shoulder against mine, and for a while, neither of us says anything at all, which by now has become its own comfortable, well-worn kind of conversation between the two of us. Iris interrupts it eventually, apologetic, holding the same archive case she has carried since the vault, and shows me one more page she has been quietly studying since that night. The second seal. Older than House Ashvale, older than Mirren's Lie, worn nearly smooth by however many generations have handled it since it was first pressed into that leather. It responded to something, she says. Quiet, careful, the way she delivers every finding that actually matters. Last night, a signal, faint, originating somewhere well outside Meridian's mapped ruins entirely. I do not know yet what it means. I only know the old seal is not as dead as everyone in that vault clearly assumed it was. Vesper studies the page over my shoulder, unbothered in the specific way she has trained herself to be unbothered by anything that is not actively trying to kill us this exact week. One more thing waiting behind the last thing, she says. Story of both our lives so far. I decide she is, once again, entirely correct about that. I look out at the skyline one more time, at a ward built from nothing but a stolen hollow and a stubborn refusal to stay down in the rain, and find that the news does not frighten me the way it probably should. It simply sits there, one more open question in a city that has never once run short of them. Whatever answers that signal, I say, it can wait its turn. I have a ward to run tonight, and hundreds of names that used to be numbers, and a wall that is held every single time I actually needed it to. Whatever is out there in the ruins can come find us on its own schedule. We will be here.
A label someone else stamps on you to protect their own power is not a verdict. It is a bet against you. Kale never argued with the word null. He built something real, paid its full price out in the open, and let the numbers say his name louder than any house ever could. Worth is not handed down, it is counted.